All right, let's get it going. Episode number 42 of the Steven Sersky podcast. I'm Steven Sersky. Thank you very much for joining me. This episode was recorded on Wednesday, September 27th, 2023, in Beijing, China. Today, I have another fellow expat joining me today in the studio, Brad Seippel, also known as thruoutin, an American-born electronic producer and multi-instrumentalist. He's been in China now for over 15 years and now runs his own studio here in Beijing. When he's not helping other people record and make their own music, he is recording and producing his own work that he's also toured the world with. In this episode, we do talk a little bit about what it's like to run a studio here in China, some of the highlights of the work, and how it has forced Brad to grow not only as a musician, but also as a business owner. Not only that, Brad is fluent in Mandarin Chinese, having learned the language largely on his own using the street method after arriving here in the country in Ningbo, I think it was, way back in 2008. We talk about how he managed to learn the language, some of the struggles he's had, and then what's kept him going all this time. And if you're wondering, just what does thruoutin mean? Well, I asked Brad that right off the bat. And with that, let's get to it. Episode number 42 with Brad Seippel, also known as thruoutin. Episode number 42, all right, with Brad thruoutin.
That's correct.
Is your last name or?
My last name is Seippel.
Seippel, okay.
Yeah, and the artist name is thruoutin.
So I was practicing this name because I was like, thruoutin. I'm like, where is this from? And this is a MIDI reference.
Right, you're correct.
Well, you told me this. So what is this? What's the reference?
So when I got my first synthesizer, I was playing around with it, and I flipped over the back side and saw all the inputs and outputs and all the things you can connect it to. And there was these three circles for MIDI that said through, out, and in. And then I started learning about what MIDI was and all this stuff for making music. And down the line, I had to pick an artist name when I was making these beats in my dorm room. And I didn't have any name, so I just looked at the synthesizer and wrote that as like a temporary name.
Yep.
And then it stuck.
It's been there for 20 years since then. Right on. Mm-hmm. So you do a lot of MIDI stuff still, or have you graduated to actual instruments?
I mean, I use MIDI in a lot of ways. With synthesizers, I connect all the hardware through MIDI to keep it all synced together.
Yeah.
And then in software, I'll use a lot of MIDI instruments when I'm writing. So virtual instruments, VSTs, and these kind of plugins, they all are based off MIDI as well. So in music production, I'm still using MIDI after all this time.
Do you play the electronic pipa? This is your big claim to fame. I'm not sure if the rest of China knows this, but you're a pretty big deal in this regard, because you're one of very few people who does this, if like maybe one of a handful.
I mean, your words, not mine. So the pipa is the Chinese lute, and the version that I'm playing is an electrified version of that. And I play it in a more experimental way, closer to how bass guitar or electric guitar would be played, but with some characteristics, some Chinese characteristics.
What do you mean Chinese characteristics?
The instrument is to put it simply, is I would say an iconic Chinese instrument. Mm-hmm. So even though that you're playing maybe a Western style on it, there's some parts of the instrument that are just going to sound like what you might associate as a Chinese sound.
Okay.
With it. So yeah, those are the flavors that it has in a way.
Have you taken any lessons?
Not officially. I haven't had like a long-term pipa teacher. I've had friends that play the traditional pipa, and they've given me some pointers and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's something I would like to do, but it's just time-based. And
yeah. How long would it take you to learn that? I mean, given that you've been playing for so long, like, is there a big difference between what you play and what like the grandmasters would be playing?
I think it's with any instrument, you learn it and play it for your whole life. It's like any skill. I know that a lot of people here that play pipa, they learn at a very early age. They'll start anywhere between 6 to 10 years old, and by adulthood they've mastered a lot of the techniques. So the stuff that I kind of play on it, I can get away with it because of my background in
Yeah.
stringed instruments. But to really learn the techniques, it's just about how much time I would put into it. I don't know. Uh, you could say if I worked really hard a few years, but there's a couple of really important techniques with the way that it's played that kind of dictate your level. So one of them is the tremolo way of playing on your right hand or your dominant hand. So if you're familiar with flamenco music, that kind of dung 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 dung.
I'm familiar with
Yeah.
the tremolo that appears on GarageBand when you can play pipa.
So yeah, so that is the same. It's like a movement of
Right.
how it's done. So in Pipa they have a similar playing technique with the fingers and the thumbs called like wheel fingers or lunger
Okay.
in Chinese, and it's a tremolo kind of effect. So basically, your hand is in like a circular, I'm not sure, a circular way like this, and you're pushing out on these fingers,
Okay.
and then you're coming back on the thumb. So it's kind of like that.
Also using your fingernails.
The fingernails, and pipa's traditionally played with stick-on fingernails. In the
Okay.
ancient times, they used animal bone and stuff like that to create a pick. But in modern day, we use plastic fingernails, and they're taped on with kind of like a band-aid
Right.
plaster kind of sticker, and so that creates a really sharp sound. And the tremolo or the lunger played on the hand is like a basic technique of the pipa. That's like once you get that, it's your the next step is just maybe learning the standards and developing your own sound.
Mhm.
So
So
yeah.
is that same on the guzheng?
Guzheng also uses a finger pick, but I believe they're facing the other way, and I don't
Oh,
think it's
okay.
the full hand. It might be on the index and the middle and the thumb,
Right.
but I'm not a Guzheng player, so I don't really know.
So then what's the extent of the tremolo that you can do?
Well, it's just it kind of creates this consistent note. So with if you think about a long note like dung, right? A piano might make that sound with the hammer, or you might make a single note on a bass guitar, boom,
Mhm.
right? That creates a tail, but the tail eventually gets smaller on the sound. Well, with the lunger or the tremolo, it kind of just makes it consistent. Like if I was to mimic it with my voice, it'd be like grrr, like
Mhm.
a rolling R, and it just kind of creates this 16th or 32nd note that just it's really iconic to the pipa. It's its own thing. When you hear that, you're like, okay, that's a pipa. So
Mhm.
for me, that's one thing I haven't perfected yet, and it's if I was to study, it'd be something that I would focus on.
How do you compensate for that in your performance now? Like, or do you?
So if I want to try and mimic it, I'll use the kind of like opposite direction, which in bass guitar, you do like kind of a walking thing with your hand.
Mhm.
And if you add your other fingers, you can make a similar sound, but instead of going out and in, you're pulling towards yourself.
So you're doing
And
it the opposite
yeah,
way.
the opposite way. And if you listen to like punk rock, a lot of fast music, if the bassist isn't playing with a pick, they're just doing these quick 16th notes. I mean, it doesn't have to be punk. You could have it in any fast-paced music. And so by my background as a kid playing in bands and stuff, I would see how fast I could go, and that's just something I built up over time. So I'll do similar things on the pipa if I want to do a short burst of something quick like that.
Mhm.
So
I don't think I've actually listened to any of your electronic pipa stuff because I've been. You sent me this link to your
right.
Bandcamp, and there are, let's see how many rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 rows of 4. So there's 22 total of albums. Is this all your work?
This is not everything, but it's the majority of it.
Of course
And
not. Because there's another library full of stuff.
there's a lot of things and unreleased stuff. But it's a good question because not every song that I make and not every album is pipa based or
Right.
has the pipa on it. So in some recordings, you might not even hear this technique that I'm describing. It might be playing more of a arpeggio or a solo type way of doing it.
Yeah.
So the pipa is not present on every track, and on every track, I'm not trying to make it sound exactly like a traditional instrument.
Oh, okay.
It might be there just for a melodic or solo type of application.
When I first heard that you played electronic pipa through your girlfriend, my colleague,
Right.
that she's like, yeah, my boyfriend plays the electronic pipa. I was like, what? I imagine that like that was your specialty and that you were hooking up distorted guitar like pedals and stuff, and that would be your main focus. But it sounds like it's more of a supplementation to the
Right.
music rather than like a focus of the music.
I think it's physically, when you look at the instrument, it's very attractive. So it might be the first thing you connect with. But I would say production and like music and software and this sort of stuff is really what I'm focusing on. And the other instruments that I add are to do exactly that and to have supplemental things to the music. So
Hmm.
when I play live, I usually bring some synths, but I will bring my pipa, and a lot of people they focus on that part. So if
It stands
it
out.
stands out. So it's a big part of what I've been doing since I came to China, but it's not the only thing in the music
Right.
that I use.
So, how much stuff do you take with you? Because you actually play live
That's true.
and you take everything with you. What's your kit like? I
Uh,
can't imagine it's fun to carry around.
I've tried to slim it down over the years, but the brain of it is Ableton Live, so that's on the computer. I control that with a MIDI controller, push two. So that's the samples and drums and all that stuff are controlled by a MIDI controller in Ableton Live.
Okay.
Then I have a sound card that will output the sound of the computer's volume and all that. And then for the virtual instruments, I have a microKORG synthesizer. It's a small uh, transportable synth. And then the pipa with its pedals. There's a bunch of effects pedals.
Okay.
All of that stuff is routed into a mixer, a small mixer. So there's about 6 channels. And then I give that to the sound person.
Okay.
So it can fit on like a 2 meter table, but that's my slim down version.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the full kit?
The full kit is might be it might be an extra synthesizer. It might be another row of pedals for the synth. It might be a drum pad. It's really how I'm feeling because every show I might bring something different.
Hmm.
But for touring, I want to be able to fit everything in a suitcase and a backpack. And
How big is the
yeah,
suitcase?
your normal like
Okay.
can go in the hull of an airplane.
Okay.
Yeah, stuff that I can not be too fussy about if it gets damaged. Like I can put all my clothes and cables there,
Yeah.
and then the more expensive stuff like my computer and pipa I can bring on the plane.
Okay.
So I try to be pretty compact, but I could actually just tour with a computer by itself. But I like to have something people can see and connect with when I'm playing.
And believe that you're actually playing the instruments, not just pressing play on an MP3.
Right.
Which I'm not going to lie, I am slowly moving towards. I
Yeah.
think I don't know. There's this commercial that happened. You're from the States, maybe you remember this. There was some TV commercial where this guy, this DJ, had like a bouncing party and everything. People are popping all over the place, and all he was doing was pressing an MP3 button. And I was like, that is like my future basically, because I think all the great ideas that you can mix them together, but then live, there's a different element to it, and I don't. I kind of like the having it consistent all the time, at least in terms when it's electronically recorded and digital and stuff like that. I don't know. Is this? Do you think that's the future? Or?
I think the future is now because as far as DJing, I'm a big proponent, a big fan of the USB drive.
Yeah.
You can put several hours of music, and I would love to do a tour where I just bring that and a backpack with a couple changes of clothes.
Yeah.
I don't have to break my back carrying gear. There's nothing wrong with playing MP3s, especially if you're DJing. That's what I would say 90% of people are doing.
Yeah.
It's the selection and the taste of the music and how you read the crowd, and that's the important thing. It's not really the gear you're using.
But if you're so following that, if you're doing MP3 mixing or DJing, are you mixing the individual tracks at that point? You think, or is it you've created the whole track and you're just pressing play and then putting the show on, sort of thing?
It depends on how you decide to organize your DJ set.
Okay.
There's a bunch of schools of thought on how it should be done. Some people think you should be playing the songs interconnectedly and making these new creations. And some people think it should be this song to that song back to back. I'm somewhere in between. I like to create loops. Like if
Okay.
there's a cool drum loop in a song, I'll loop it and then I'll bring in the next one and kind of for 30 seconds between the two songs, create a new song with the both of them.
Hmm.
And then some DJ mixers will have effects built in, reverbs and delays and echoes, and just kind of you're using music that's already created and already done, but gluing it together in a different way and
Has
making
not,
this
that part hasn't been
right.
done yet. Okay.
So for me, that makes DJing more interesting, and there's no shame in doing it in any way you're doing it, as long as you're having fun, number one, and then you're entertaining, the people that you're there to party with, basically.
So the big names like Hardwell, Timmy Trumpet, those guys, Martin Garrix, what would they be doing?
Uh, well, this is like EDM, right?
Yeah.
So, in the EDM world, it's entertainment. It's very much a show. So, Trumpet he's I don't know if he's actually playing it, but the videos and stuff I've seen of him, he's out there. He's getting people interested. He's standing up on the table and adding a live aspect to his DJ set.
Hmm.
So with some of these festivals, they want a bit of security in case something goes wrong. So sometimes there's a set that's prepared in advance.
Okay.
So you might have a 2.5 hour DJ set that might be pretty ironclad. There might be some transitions that they're doing, but my experience working with as a ghostwriter for EDM artists
Ghostwriter. No way.
a while
Okay.
back, it's another story. But they wanted as much prepared in advance.
Mm.
So it was down to like each song of the DJ set had to be kind of approved by the manager,
Yeah.
and uh, when you get to that level, you are really relying on nothing going wrong. There's no margin for error, especially in big festivals in Europe and North America. You don't get too many chances, and
Hmm.
it should be that anywhere. You should always give your best when you go out. But so I don't know how much they're doing like on the fly with these larger EDM artists, but a lot is I would say a lot is prepared, and the transitions are very thought through.
Right.
Right.
So it's sort of like A, B, C, and then you're just kind of like dialing them in as you need to, sort of thing.
Right.
Maybe,
You want
maybe
to
controlling the fader or something.
faders. Not to say that these people aren't choosing their own songs.
Right.
Creative stuff is
Yeah.
happening on their end, but they're like I said, they're entertainers. They're wanting to get the crowd hyped. I mean, if we go into like even like Steve Aoki, he's got a lot of things he does to keep the crowd entertained. And when you're doing that and working with transitions and stuff, they're two different worlds. So a
Yeah.
lot of people have someone else kind of controlling that, or they're just really focusing on the music. And
Mhm.
if you watch a Boiler Room set or you watch some festival DJs, it might be a little bit different than what the top 10 EDM DJs might be doing on their big room, big stadium
Right.
shows.
Hmm.
And it just makes a lot more sense to keep things more secure.
What were you doing as a ghostwriter?
Okay, so
This sounds fun.
yeah, no, it's a long story, but uh, about 2 years ago, a friend of mine recommended me to this manager who said that uh, they were wanting to do an EDM project, and a lot of times in China, when people say the word EDM, they just mean any electronic music.
Yeah. Dun,
And
dots, dun,
yeah,
dots.
and so I kind of throughout the first conversation, he kept using the word EDM, and I'm like, oh, he means like just like club music or electronic music.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to verify. I was like, you mean EDM as in the genre? And
Yeah.
he was like, yes. And so he showed me some references, and I was like, okay. So I showed him my music and what I was capable of. I was like, so you know that none of the music I do is EDM. He's like, yeah, but I think you really can bridge one gap because the DJ is a pipa player,
Okay.
and she went to this conservatory, and
So she's properly trained and everything.
She's a proper pipa player, and they wanted to promote her as a China 100 DJ,
Right.
cute girl on the stage, and they had this whole kind of I don't know, agenda of how they wanted to present her, but they didn't have the music part of it.
It's
So
kind of a big part of it.
yeah, and so I was hired basically to write a few originals for her, and record some of the pipa that she played and put it into those originals, and then prepare 3 DJ sets. One was a festival set, one was a small club set, and one was like a big room,
Right.
trancey kind of set. So I went through a few months of just educating myself on EDM, and it's not just it's not one genre actually, and this was even 2 years ago. There was a blend of kind of what happened with dubstep becoming the American bro step
Okay.
that merged in with its EDM. Then you had like the trancier side of it, the Europeans like doing their more trance and house, and then you have the commercial stuff. Like anytime Taylor Swift or Adele or Bieber are going to come out with a song, they're going to make sure that there's a EDM, someone doing an EDM version of it.
Right. Like a cover version, I guess?
A cover or an edit. They would call them the radio edit or club edit.
Oh, yeah. Club
So
edit. That's typically
yeah,
what they use.
right. Or extended edit is another one they would use, and it's just longer. So I started to realize that even EDM as a genre in when I was familiar with it in like 2014, in 2020, 2021, there was a lot of kinds of EDM,
Yeah.
and they wanted to have 3 different sets of that. So this artist had a DJ teacher at a school in Wangjing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So she would go every week and learn how to DJ, starting from zero. So I had this DJ teacher and this manager giving me reports every week of like where she was, and then I would send them the music, at least an hour and a half of music for
Right.
each set. Then they would pick through and say, we like this one, we don't like that one, we like this one, we don't like that one. And then on top of that, they would come to the studio and we'd work on the original and the original tracks that she would play. So her sets were going to be like she'd DJ for a bit and then she'd put on this pipa and like kind of I never saw the set, so I don't know if she actually ever did it, but kind of fake play
Right.
to the track, and then people would be like, "Wow, this is going on," and then she would back and do it. But so I did my part of it, and then I left the project, so I never got to really see it. But that was my experience as a ghostwriter for an EDM artist.
Can I ask who it was? Do you know?
So this was another this was a sort of aggravating thing about it. I don't know if they went with this name in the end,
Okay.
but I asked the manager. I was like, "So what's going to be the name? Is she going to use their Chinese name or have a stage name?" And they're like, "We're thinking Enya." And I was like, "By the way, you might just want to Google that." Because there's a pretty famous, new age and ambient pop artist named
She's
Enya.
been around for a while.
Yeah. And they're like, yeah, but it's okay. It's China. It doesn't matter. So
to an
I don't,
extent, I guess.
I don't know what they went with eventually, but
Right.
that's so funny. Yeah, it was.
Did you hear any of the final project, the final parts that they chose?
No, I mean, it was in the end, it was a bit of a stressful project because of all the edits and I gave them a pretty fair price. So by the end of it, I was a little annoyed with the project. So
Right.
there was one point when they invited me to go out to like a practice of it at one of the Gongti clubs.
Yeah.
But it was like going to start at like 3 a.m. or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
And I wasn't being paid, and I was just like, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. I was hired to do it, but I wasn't hired to be their friends.
Right.
And it got to that point in it where the project wasn't fun, and I had done what was expected of me, so then I left the project.
Can I ask how much ghostwriters get paid in general?
I should have asked for a lot more, but
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you're not going to retire off of that money anytime
no,
soon.
no, and that's why having an agency or a manager is good. For me, it was a learning experience.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. It was fun to know, and I learned there's a lot to IDM, EDM, not IDM. That's a different
Yeah.
story. But there's a lot to EDM, and there's no shade I want to throw on the genre because I do like it, and there's some cool concepts in there, and it's a big genre. So
I listen to EDM quite a bit actually, and I know one guy. He was just at Creamfield's Beijing where Timmy Trumpet played.
Yeah.
And then he also went to Japan last week for Ultra Japan, and I was supposed to go, but my plans didn't work out, so I'm a little bit miffed that I didn't go. But he actually, I'm surprised because he's a bit of an older guy. He's in his 50s or so. But he bounces around the room. He gets into it. He doesn't drink. He's not on
Right.
drugs, nothing. He's just like, fuck, I'm gonna do it, man. I'm gonna love it, man. And he does this EDM dance club stuff. He
Yeah.
will ask, hey, Steve, do you want to go? And I'm like, well, what time? He's like, well, yeah, the show starts at 12. I'm like, PM or AM? He's like, well, midnight. I'm like, no, I'm in bed, dude. I'm like, I'm done. I don't know what 3 a.m. starts. Even your shows start very late, don't
I
they? I
don't.
mean,
I mean, I don't mind a later show if I've planned for it.
right.
If that's my next day is not busy, I don't mind it starting at midnight and coming home at like 5 or 6 in the morning. If I'm able to allocate my time.
Right.
If I have to work at 8 o'clock the next day, then I mean maybe 10 years ago I would risk it, but
Now,
I'm not one of those people that wants to be grumpy and stay at home and be really against live music or DJs, and I'm still not at that point in my life. I don't know if I ever will be, but I just think that you have to decide if you're committed to wanting to do it.
I've always sort of wondered, like even when I was playing in rock bands and stuff like that, the whole idea of like the headliner. I remember towards sort of the later parts, like 2003, 2004, people would say, well, if we're going to headline, we want to play at like 9:30 or 10. And then they'd be done by 11:30 or 11. They want to go home. They're like, we don't want to be playing to an empty bar at 2 o'clock. We don't need to extend this evening any longer than it has to be. And I remember hearing stories that back in the day, live shows used to start at 7,
Hmm.
and you'd be home at 10,
Yeah.
10:30. And I think China still goes by that. Like I think the Creamfields was over at 10, 10:30 or something like that. You can catch the last two subways home.
Yeah.
It's nice. I kind of like it. I don't know. I mean, maybe I am in that part of my life where I'm like, nah, nah. If it's past 9:30, forget it.
Yeah, it's totally just based on your personal habits and stuff. Uh, I feel that back to what you were saying about headliners in America, at least the headliner is the last band.
Yeah.
You might have a couple openers, at least two bands, but three is usually the sweet spot, and the last band might be done by midnight
Yeah.
at the latest. In China, I've found that the headliner is, because of maybe this subway problem you're talking about, um, that the headliner is put second. So you usually
Yeah.
get a support band, the headliner, and then
Clean
another band that
clean
wants,
up crew.
yeah, cleanup band. So the China headliner is usually second.
Oh, okay, that's
Um,
good info.
and I haven't been to Japan, but I've heard that that's also a case there because a lot of people are trying to get the subway home.
Yeah.
Beijing doesn't have a 24-hour subway, so it's a similar situation for a lot of students that are trying to save money, or people who don't live near. So,
And the buses don't make the same routes that the subways do.
right.
Because there is a night
Mhm.
bus route, but it's not as, I guess, not as not as widespread as the subway.
Exactly. Yeah, there are a couple night buses in Beijing. When I lived out in East Beijing, if
Yeah.
I was in the city, I might take the night bus back home sometimes, do a closer spot, and then call a taxi.
Right.
So I think that's why the shows, especially rock shows, places like venues, they're gonna end a little bit earlier, and the clubs, I find that it really starts to get hopping around midnight,
One.
and
Yeah.
yeah, one, and there's a couple venues that I like. Groundless Factory in Beijing.
Okay. Where's that?
It's out in East Beijing as well, like north of Dalianpo and the airport.
Okay.
It's in a business complex, so at night there's no neighbors or anything. So
Right.
it's like its own little place. So once you're there, it's kind of you're committed. Every time I've been there, it's like you can stay till like the sun comes up.
Hmm. A lot
But
of people go out there.
yeah, and it's a little more on the underground club scene.
Okay.
It's a big warehouse venue, LGBTQ plus friendly. A lot of
How would they know? I see how some of those people dress. I mean, everyone's fitting in anywhere. I mean,
yeah. I mean, not that it's the dress would define it, but it's you can tell there's a younger crowd as well.
yeah.
But it's not something you might see in Gongti at those clubs.
Well,
Yeah,
Gongti goes for a little bit more of the
yeah.
mainstream route and stuff like that. Have they opened any clubs in Gongti yet? Because Mix and the other one that was there, I stopped going to clubs years ago, man. I don't do it
Yeah.
anymore.
No, I mean I was never really too knowledgeable. I know those two that you mentioned. There was a African bar called Underground for a while,
Yeah, I
and
think I remember that one. I was there one time. I'm like, I don't need to be here. I
right.
mean, it was they did a lot of karaoke stuff, and I was just like, yeah, this is too late for me anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I went. That was the last time I was in Gongti. There was a South African National Day
oh,
DJ
okay,
night, and they were playing this genre called Amapiano. It's
okay,
like house music from South Africa,
yeah,
and that was the last time I was there. I think I wound up going home like 2 or 3, so still, pretty late for most people.
yeah. I I don't miss being out all night. I used to in my early days in China. Since then, I kind of like being up at
Mhm.
6 o'clock, six
Yeah.
thirty, or at least having the alarm going off and knowing that my alarm went off, sort of thing. But yeah, staying out all night. So I then again, I have no sort of desire to be performing live,
Mhm.
like in the same situation as you. Whereas you're like, if that's what the bar or the club requires or requests, I mean, you might have to oblige them. But
Right.
I don't know. I would almost kind of hope that live music would start earlier, just so more people can, so I can not be out so late.
Well, that's why you might like ambient music. The ambient shows, the ones that I really like, they start at like 7, maybe sometimes 5 in the afternoon on a Sunday. Yeah, those shows usually don't go very long.
Right, but then that's just playing an MP3.
Well, it depends on the artist.
How many people did I just offend with that?
There's probably like some MP3 ambient DJs. I know that there's a lot of shows popping up around Beijing where it's just ambient nights and their
Mhm.
DJs playing. But it really depends on the artist. Some might use just software. Some might play an MP3, like you said. Some might use hardware synthesizers. It really depends on the artist.
Yeah, I've basically gone down to an iPad. I actually have a, I don't know if you saw my complete control board back there. That's still in the box,
Oh wow.
and it's been there for a while.
Hmm.
I'm probably going to add to that this year with the Machina
Hmm.
setup. And it was the whole idea of when I got the iPad, I was like, why do I need a drum pad? It
Hmm.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But now I understand why is because having the physical buttons that are outside of the software system is a lot easier to use than sometimes the software itself.
Mhm.
But in terms of the ambient stuff, I have noticed one of the issues because I do some sound tracking for my own videos that if I ever create something like ambient music, you have to press record because very often you'll play and it'll be like 15 minutes. And you're like, oh, I didn't press record.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, that was such a great idea, but now it's over. And now I'm hammered anyway because I've been drinking while during the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So
It's an important part of recording anything is
just
that
press
record
record,
button.
kind of like with the podcasting. It's
Yeah.
like just make sure you press record and
Right.
get it on with it. You mentioned something about the Chinese DJ pipa player learning how to DJ. Now we live in a country where this country, when it grabs hold of a subject, it learns it very well,
Right.
and it's like it's just a collective. They study it. It's like they take the idea, they get the idea from somewhere else, and they take that idea and they like master the study of it.
Mhm.
Can this music be taught that way, or does it have to be more organic in the sense that you start out as a kid or someone tinkering around with MIDI boards and stuff like that? Or like, what's your feeling in that regard of learning how to develop maybe a new style of music or developing your own music? Does it have to be organic, or can you learn it from a master?
I can only talk about my experience here. I feel like, as a disclaimer, uh, an American coming to China and being like the know-all on Chinese people is, you're already losing by starting out that way.
Right.
But I can only talk about what I've experienced and I've seen. So in the 15 years that I've been here, I've seen waves and trends, and I have noticed what you're talking about. Maybe if there's something from abroad, when it comes here, people they want to know more about it. It's cool to them, so they will invest a lot of time into it. I could compare it to other Asian countries, maybe like Japan. I feel like in from my experience, also I've never been to Japan, but this is my impression of it. Is that, yeah, like look at the automotive industry. They took something from a foreign country, they made it their own, and they made it better,
Mhm.
right? arguably that's one of Japan's claims to fame in their economy and why they've been such a powerful country. Well, with China doing similar things, taking stuff from abroad, focusing on it, learning it, I feel like here it's like sometimes riding on that trend and trying to use it as fast as possible to capitalize on it and to captivate people to want to do more of it. And what I think is really important is that, yeah, it can be foreign, but if someone local does it and does it well, that catapults it
Yeah.
even more because I think it's more relatable.
Hmm.
So when I've seen, for example, the boom in DJs or certain genres like post rock or heavy metal, when those like really blew up in China, it wasn't because of foreign act.
No,
It was because someone here took the time, studied it, and did it well, and people related to it. And then you get the people that you know mm, try to do what they did, not really copy, but you get the spin-offs really.
yeah.
So yeah, I can only really talk about my experience and what I've seen over the last couple of years, and I think that electronic music and DJing, it can all be learned, but the thing that you can't really teach someone is how to select and how to have taste. You can write in books on what is good and why you should like an art form and what makes it good, but that can't be taught. The creative part, the taste, the personal style is developed,
Right.
and that's up to the person. And you can't just say, well, this is good, and this is how you do the good thing. Now you can do it. It's a process, and that really depends on the individual.
Yeah. Is there, like, in terms of what, because you've met a lot of Chinese musicians, uh, is there a big sort of push to have a multidisciplinary sort of approach to music? Or is it like if you learn the pipa, that's all you learn? You don't learn drums or piano or anything else. There's no transferable skills being taught.
That's the older way to do it, and that's I think how a lot of the classically trained musicians here were. But you have a lot of people that have access to the internet that are just gonna learn what they think is interesting,
Mhm.
from visual arts to music to any type of study technique, even coding. Uh, you have a younger generation that doesn't need to have someone else teach them; they can find that on their own. And those are some of the more interesting people to talk to because they've saved a lot of time. They've circumvented the process and they've learned stuff on their own. Um, Back to multi disciplines. Uh, I know a person who plays a Chinese style flute called the chirba.
Okay.
It's I believe it's bamboo, and when they learned it, they had a friend that said, "Yeah, you should learn this instrument." And halfway through it, they were interested in another instrument, and they said, "So I'm thinking about learning this other instrument." And the teacher said, "Well, um, if you switch to another instrument, I won't recommend a teacher to teach you. You have to stay with this instrument."
Okay.
So they were really good at the instrument, this musician, but they told me is like at the very beginning they wanted to study something completely different. But the way that the master told him, it was like, if you want to study with me, this is the instrument you learn.
Yeah.
You don't learn anything
But the
else
master was a master of that
of
instrument.
that instrument, right? So that's an older way to do it, and that's how a lot of people at the conservatories and the academies, that's how they're learning it. But the with electronic music, it's kind of there's no real one instrument that everyone's playing. I mean, you could argue that it's the computer,
Well, it's a style of music, though. Like
right?
if you're going to learn EDM, then you learn EDM. You don't learn techno or D&B.
Yeah, although I would say that techno is like a safe bet here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, and it's like if you're a little I don't know, introverted and you don't have much confidence, you might just go with the thing that's the most popular because it's safe.
Mhm.
So I believe that is kind of a problem. Whereas the genre is not actually important. It's what you are wanting to do. You can be the best techno DJ ever, and there's no problem. Just so happens that techno is one of the most popular of DJing forms here, so a lot of people choose it because it's popular, and there's very little branching out. So some smaller subgenres that I've seen in other countries. One, for example, footwork is an American style of electronic music.
Okay. I haven't heard of it.
It's like a fast tempo style of music that's supposed to be paired with dancing. It's from Chicago.
Okay.
It came out of Chicago, but then you get people all around the world making it, from New Zealand to Japan to Poland, Spain, and Mexico. You have this genre is a global genre, but you don't really see a scene in China about it. There's people who might DJ it or be interested in it, but there's a lot of genres like this where kind of there's probably tons of people super interested in making it, but it's not popular. So there's no payoff to get that credibility.
Yeah, I mix footwork, do
Right.
I? Right. So then, how did you get into the pipa then? I mean, this is not something that you were studying and you were playing in the States, were you?
No, as I mentioned, I played bass guitar, played strings and bands and stuff. But when I came to China in 2009, I started looking on Wikipedia and stuff of like Chinese instruments and music from China. And yeah, pipa was one of them that was always mentioned. I would say pipa and guzheng are the two iconic Chinese instruments.
Yeah.
Maybe some flute as well, but that's the main thing in like a kung fu movie or a Chinese period film that you see that you're going to hear that. So I was like, oh yeah, I knew that. I just didn't know it was called pipa. And I told myself, I was like, well, while I'm here, I should probably learn something uh, musically so I can take it, because I didn't know how long I was going to stay in China. So
Did you choose the music? Like, because you're also street taught Chinese language, which we can get into.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, so you made that conscious decision. Like, this is what I'm going to take away from this country.
Right. I said, yeah, well, I said that I'm going to be here for at least a year.
20 years later.
Yeah, it's been 15,
15.
going on 20. And I just said, I want to pick up something while I'm here. So I went to the music store near my house, and they had a bunch of things hanging up. I had no idea what was what. I talked with a really annoyed lady and asked if I could play things. And the pipa, it was the one that, like, I don't know, I could immediately, like, okay, figure out, okay, these are strings. I put my hand here. This makes a noise. And yeah, I bought the cheapest one in the shop and annoyed my roommates by practicing in my room.
How long did it take you to become good at it, or like presentable, where you weren't annoying your
Right.
annoying your roommates anymore?
I didn't really start playing it until like my second or third year out.
So it sat
Yeah.
in the corner for 2
No,
years.
no. I mean, I would play at home, and
Okay.
I did some recordings with it, but I slowly started to add it to my live set. About 2011, when
Mhm.
I was living in Beijing already. So I was at that time I was living in Ningbo,
Okay.
and I moved to Beijing, and then I started slowly mixing it with my live electronic project.
Okay. So it wasn't like one of these, I'm going to try that, and then you buy it and it sits in the corner for 3 years and you're like,
No,
this never worked, did it?
no. I mean, I guess it's because I didn't have a lot of things at that point. I didn't have a lot of musical things at that point. So
Yeah.
it was like if I wanted to just play around with a melody, I would just grab the pipa and see, and eventually it started to, like, I'd write songs on the pipa, and then I would write an electronic arrangement around that instead of the other way around.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the electronic pipa that you have is you make it yourself, right?
It is customized, so I didn't physically like cut the wood and make it that way, but I found a luthier in Shanghai who
Mhm.
makes these pipas. So a friend of a friend like recommended me to go see this guy, and we talked. I told him my requirements and like what was important to me, and he drew up a draft, and he had done one before for another artist. So I knew he could already make one, and after a couple back and forth like shipments, we got it to where I wanted it, and that's the one that I'm using now.
Including the electronics?
Yeah, so it's uh the same fretboard as a traditional pipa, and the same wood and all that stuff, but a different tuning peg. So the pipa has wooden pegs, and this has aluminum pegs.
Okay.
So it's more like that's more like a guitar. And then because it's electronic, you need a way to push out the sound. So we installed a pickup, a guitar pickup, so that it can be plugged in, and then that goes into all my effects pedals. And it's essentially, I would say, a blend of an electric guitar and a pipa.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're putting this through distortion pedals as well? Like, what kind of pedals are you using to modify the sound?
I'm not a huge fan of distortion,
I just used
but
it because
yeah,
it's the one that I know.
but I most importantly I have a tuner. That's the first thing that it hits, because with electronic music you're playing with keys that are perfectly in tune.
Right.
You can change it, but the starting point on a VST or a synth is perfectly in tune.
Yeah.
So if I'm just even slightly out of tune on the pipa, it's like pretty noticeable. So tuner to make sure it's tuned, even to bypass it in case I want to just turn it off completely during the set, I'll hit the tuner and that cuts it out. And then that goes into reverbs and delays, which depending on the song can like add a bit of depth to the pipa, because by itself it's just a very dry sounding instrument. If you were sitting on your bed playing a guitar, electric guitar not plugged in, that's what it sounds like. So the reverb and delay just gives this depth to it. And then I have an overdrive pedal, which just it's a little like distortion, but what overdrive does is I feel it pokes the instrument up a little bit over all that delay, and maybe it lets it not become as hidden. So I'm not using it as like a metal or rock sound, but just to kind of give it a bit of bite and push it up
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more. And then I think on the very end I have a looper in case I want to extend something. If I'm running out of samples on the computer or something, and I want to make a new creation, I'll loop it at the end.
Right. Are you interested in getting into any other instruments at all? Like any Chinese instruments, any other international instruments?
Well, yeah, the guqin has always been very interesting to me. But actually, speaking of your MIDI controller behind us, I had one about like a 300 Kwai guqin, and it sat in my room, and I never paid much attention to it. So yeah, I got rid of that, because if I'm not using something, I like to not have it
Oh, you don't like it just
anymore.
sitting around
Yeah.
collecting dust and looking at you, and your girlfriend questions, why do you still have that? Why did you buy it in the first place?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
with that though, one of the reasons I haven't used is because of space. Now you have your own studio now.
Right.
You're not still living in the same place that you have like for a while, but I have noticed, especially as I started podcasting, it's just like this. I'm able to modify the space. Like,
Right.
I can work here. I can shift it. I can make it into a podcast space. But if I put a keyboard out, like actually that desk right there is
Yeah.
supposed to be my music studio / video editor.
Perfect.
Yes, but there's a bunch of books on there, and I haven't moved any of that stuff, which needs to be moved all over the other place. So it's
Right.
like, and given that we've been so busy lately, there just hasn't been time to modify modify the apartment the way I would like it, so that I can just sit down and use the keyboard as it is.
Mhm.
So, because that's what I want. Like I did have it on the big table over here. Problem was, like, it's huge,
Right.
and then it takes up everything, and I can't use my keyboard anymore. So
Mhm.
like this is meant to be a multi-use sort of multi-purpose, not a singular use of studio space like what you have as
Right.
well. So speaking of your studio, like so where are you working these days? Where's your studio located?
So I have a studio near Dongzhimen and Dongshishitiao, and it is my like main place that I'm working right now.
I've seen
Um,
pictures of it. You've been posting it on WeChat.
Right.
So how big is the space, and like what do you have in there?
So it's 2 rooms, and I guess I don't know exactly square meters, somewhere like
Pick a number.
60 square meters.
Sure.
Yeah. But it was an old office building, and we completely gutted it. I say we. I worked with a contractor to design it.
Oh, okay.
And so the first room when you walk in is the production room. So computer and all the instruments like synthesizers and controllers and speakers and all that stuff is in one room. And then that's all soundproofed and designed to meet the standards of a basic studio, and then you can walk into the next room, and that's where drums and vocals, any recording is done in that room. So it's also soundproofed, and um, yeah, that's pretty much it. Because a lot of the work that I do is not actually related to my uh, own project. So
Right.
I might be recording vocals one night and then drums the next day. So it has to be pretty modular as well, like you were saying with your apartment. So I might be shifting things around for what the project is.
Yeah, but you don't have to do office work in there.
Um,
And you're not doing podcast interviews there as well. You could though.
yeah, I mean,
guess you
but
could.
when you break it down, like you're sitting at a desk behind a computer, it's still office work, even though it's something I like to do. It's still office work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of drum set do you have there?
I have a Tama
Okay.
Silver Star drum set with a DW snare.
Okay.
It's a secondhand snare I bought off a friend. Originally he was keeping it in a studio I had before, and like the agreement was like, you can come and practice, but I get to use your drum set for recording. And so when I moved to my next place, I was like, hey, by the way, I really like this drum set. Do you mind if I buy it from you? It's because I'm well versed in what it sounds like and what it can do in the room. So
Yeah.
that's the set I use. No other reason I bought it. It was just I was
Convenient.
familiar with it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Is that sort of a hallmark of being a good producer, good studio engineer, is knowing the equipment? Because I guess like even with microphones, like this microphone, one of the reasons I'm scared of getting rid of it is because I know it. I know the
Totally.
sound. I mean, what sort of instruments, and does this apply to like MIDI as well,
Sure.
like the boards and stuff? How?
Well, MIDI is like just zeros and ones. There's no when you're talking about equipment that uses MIDI, that's your controller perhaps. So if you're well versed in a controller and you know how to use it, and it does everything you need it to do, then there's no real reason to switch it up. So knowing what you have is more important than having many options. For software, for example, I used a lot of plugins when I first started. A couple thousand plugins I got off Taobao or something,
Okay.
and I just
Great place to get them.
Yeah, just had a bunch of things, and slowly, cracks, they cause problems. Your software shuts down. They're not reliable. Your client might want something. So I just started. If I'm making money from production, I decided I would use that money to buy the actual things and support those companies. So I started to
Make sure it's real and it
Right.
works and it's compatible and you get the upgrades or the updates.
Exactly. But another side step to that is that I downgraded from having thousands of plugins to just a couple. I probably don't use more than 20 plugins.
Which ones? Which are the go-tos?
Depending on what I do, but in mixing is when I'm using most of the plugins. So Waves is a company that I use a lot of their
Okay,
plugins.
I was researching them, and it seems the opinion of them has gone down recently.
The opinion's basically due to their subscription
Yes.
policy.
Yeah.
So it is annoying. You spend money on something and then they tell you have
Software.
to
You spend money on
so
software.
You should be able to keep it. But this is coming back from like Adobe when they did it for all their products. You buy a subscription. Pro Tools does it for their stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is annoying, and I get it. But they're a company; they have to make money, and that's how software is going. That's the direction that things are going in. So,
So you got Waves. What else you got?
Waves, I use one that's on like every mix I do is the Fab Filter series. So
Okay.
I use their
Which,
EQ.
all of them?
Their Q3 is the EQ I use. C2 is the compressor that I use, and a couple other ones. But those are like every mix I do. Like my corrective EQ is with Q3, and probably the compressor I'm using to like not add any color, just to simply compress, that I'm used to and I know what it does, is the Fab Filter C2.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other things there here and there, but yeah, Fab Filter, and then Ozone. I use some of its built-in ones, not just for mastering, but like the limiter in Ozone, the maximizer. There's a tape setting that you can use as well. Just really depends, like what I'm using it for. But I try to be very sparse on which ones I use. I use a couple on every channel, and then only because I know what it's going to do. If there's a very special effect I want,
Yeah.
I might use something else. But yeah, EQ and compression is like the majority of what I'm doing.
Yeah, we were talking the other week about well, you were saying that isotope and ozone are great tools, and I tried to use it again to master or to mix or to fix the audio for my last podcast, and I'm doing something wrong. It's distorting the whole thing. I know what it's doing wrong. It's using the wrong reference track, and I don't. It
Oh.
can't. It won't match. It won't use the reference track that I'm putting in
Hmm.
to match the EQ and the settings and stuff like that. So it keeps on doing it towards like these EDM tracks. I'm going the built-in sort of the stock
The presets.
choices, the presets.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop doing that. Like use this MP3 or this wave as a reference track, and I can't figure out how to do it. So
Yeah, I can show it to you. It's no problem.
it's another tool that it's sitting there that is I'm not using because it's just like the learning curve to get it going in my workflow is too much. The only other purchase I've made is Logic Pro for the iPad, and that's what I do use quite a bit. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I've learned expansion, EQ, compression, and then that's about it. I think I use two compressors now on my podcast, but very very simple
Right.
mixing strip.
It's all very useful to use. Music and voiceover, or I would say like more delicate music, they have to be approached in a different way. So one thing I was doing recently was some music for an exhibition that an artist asked me to master. So this music is more on like the avant-garde and ambient side, where there's like very quiet parts, some loud parts, and just maybe more atmospheric sounds. So if you're going to use the same techniques in a club song, where you're really wanting to push everything, make sure everything's very loud, catch people's attention, use that same concept to mix a voiceover or something that has less information, just like a more simpler kind of sound. It's gonna not really represent the original sound source correctly. So I found that like instead of like pushing something to be super loud and super compressed doesn't really work with every genre of music.
Right. Yeah. So do you have a favorite plugin that you go to, favorite sound, or like is there if someone listens to an album that you've mixed or mastered, can they tell you it's you by a certain
Mm,
flair or whatever?
that's a good question. I would hope that it's so neutral that there's no um there's no
Indistinguishable, undistinguishable?
I want to one of the things is like I want to make it as close to what the artist had in mind, but make it sound a little bit better. So I'm trying not to like overshadow by like adding my like here's what I can do. I want to make it sound balanced and clear and unoffensive. That's actually the goal that I'm trying to do when I mix something. Just trying to enhance what the artist has given me, and that goes the same with mastering as well. Is there's some creative things that I do in mixing. I like width a lot. I like to stereo pan a lot of things, and
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of making things sound wet, like lots of reverb and delay. So it's a lot of people are like, hey, let's bring it in a bit, or let's take some of
Okay.
those effects off, and that's just like working with a client. But yeah, I guess I like things more in like the spacey area, more little more psychedelic and dubby. That's like how I like to hear things. But that might not work on like a folk guitar album,
Right.
right? So you just have to think about the project and what fits and suits it best.
So who's coming to you for studio work? You already had this DJ girl. You've mentioned guitars before. So like who else? Who works with you, or who do you work with?
I work with a lot of different people. Beijing being an international city, you have people from all around the world and you have people from all around China. So with my local clients, I've worked with pop singers, Chinese like Mando pop singers,
Right.
and rock bands. And then with the expat community, uh, one of the artists I worked with a lot last year is this guy named Eric Allen,
Okay.
an American folk Americana singer songwriter. So I learned a lot in that genre working with him. So I worked with a lot of other expats from different countries doing folk and country and blues music. So recording, like how to record an acoustic guitar, like I got a lot of experience on how to do that sound. And then because of my interest in electronic music, getting to work with people that are on the cusp of that genre. So hip hop and pop and experimental music. It's all kind of, if you know a couple electronic techniques, they cross over to those genres as well.
Yeah.
So there's a Cameroonian singer that I work with a lot named Abe Shushu, and he does a lot of Afrobeat and other African styles, but his own style as well. So it's people from lots of different genres and backgrounds that I'm working with, and that's just the one of the things of living in a big city.
Do you have the same pay rate for each of these projects, or is it different?
Um, I
You don't
try.
have to give me specifics.
No, I mean that's. I was thinking about this earlier today. Is like with what I charge, I try to keep it consistent because it's easier for me. Number one
Yeah.
to remember, and then it depends on the project. Definitely, if there's more work, then there's a higher rate. But you generally, for me, it's just better to have a fixed price for everybody, uh, more or less, so that if you're getting recommended by someone else, they say a price and you give them a higher quote, it doesn't make you look that great.
Hmm.
So I try to keep everything pretty fixed, upfront about what my costs are, and I don't know, it's just be upfront with people before you start working with them, and you avoid a lot of problems.
How much does mixing and mastering a 3-hour podcast cost?
For you, it's gratis for
Right.
sure.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the reasons I started this podcast was because I want to learn how to use Logic Pro. Like that's back in 2020, January 2020, when the whole pandemic was just sort of kicking off. I was like, I finally have time. Like I didn't see the pandemic as a bad thing just yet, and at least because I still had money at that point. But then I was like, I have a golden opportunity. I'm going to learn how to use Logic Pro.
Yeah.
And then it was like, sat down. I had no idea how complicated Logic Pro. My biggest
Mhm.
difference, because I come from a film background
Right.
ish, using Final Cut Pro,
Mhm.
but my biggest complaint was that with Logic Pro and other like audio software, is that all of the buttons are hidden. Like all of a sudden the mixer
Mhm.
would pop up. And I'm like, how the hell did I get the mixer? Well, you press the X key, right?
Right.
And then you press the I key and the Y key, and like
Mhm.
these different windows are popping up all over the place. This doesn't happen in Final Cut.
Right.
Video, you drop the clip in, you put your effects on, and you don't have to go through a little. You can't dial in, but you can dial in how much of an effect you want to apply. But in terms of like your mixer board, your chain, I had finding my way
Mhm.
through the menus and the sub menus of Logic. It was so daunting. So
It takes time. Um,
forever.
uh, my background in video editing is iMovie on the Mac. I mean, like
Okay.
that's all I mean, if I need to make something very quickly. But I do know, I've used Logic and other software. The first Mac I had GarageBand on it,
Yeah.
and that's basically the Logic and GarageBand. I think you can use the files from GarageBand in Logic,
Yes.
and they have some things that overlap.
But GarageBand
But
is
no.
far simpler than Logic.
I don't think you really want to be comparing the two, but they have some things that overlap. But the thing about Logic, I think it is there might be some hidden things, but for a lot of people, it's pretty user friendly compared to other software out there.
Once you kind of know what to do and where to look and how to put things together, yeah, it's more intuitive than other softwares out there. I bought it because I was like, when I bought it back in 2017, I knew I wasn't going to use it right away.
Mhm.
But same with Final Cut. So I bought, actually, what I did, this was funny, is that in Canada, I asked them, well, so can I buy gift cards that I can finance at 0% for 12 months? Or can I buy the software and finance that? Because I was financing the MacBook. But they're like, well, you can't finance the software, but you can finance the MacBook. I'm like, okay, but I can buy the gift cards. So I bought like $1,200 worth of gift cards, and like, sir, are you sure you're not being scammed by someone? I'm like, no, no,
Oh
no,
yeah,
I'm scamming myself. Believe me, it's my credit card. This is my own stupidity, and so I ended up buying all these gift cards and buying the software. And again, it just sat there for years until I had the time. So pandemic. I mean, a lot of people didn't like the pandemic. I was kind of like, boy, that gave me a lot of time to work on stuff. It really did.
definitely.
So, but yeah, Logic Pro. I mean, uh, I, I've been looking at people to, no, actually, that's a lie. I have not wanted to hire anybody else to do editing for me because I still feel I have more to learn in the Logic Pro film editing and stuff like that. And I guess the other thing is like, I'm not sure about your clients. Do they know what they're talking about when they ask you what to do?
Usually, the least experienced have the most misconceptions and the least knowledge of the terms, but
Okay.
that's just general. Um,
Could you give an
it,
example?
just terminology. Sometimes people, they might use a term like, let's say, uh, auto tune. That's a great one because everybody knows auto tune. We've heard it in lots of popular music, but there's another type of effect called pitch correction.
Yes.
Auto tune does change the pitch, but pitch correction is probably what you hear more often than auto tune. Pitch correction is taking maybe a note that was sung flat or sharp and popping it up to where it should be in the song. Um, it's most rock and hip hop and pop music. The engineer is going to be doing this. There might be someone that's hired just to do that. Then, as more of an effect, people might use auto tune. But for most people that don't know anything about music, and they want to, they know, okay, that vocal is off, put auto tune on it. A lot of times I'll get these sort of things where they're just confused about what the terminology is, the lingo,
Hmm.
and
What about EQ and compression?
right. So that's another thing where um, EQ and I've had some cases where someone was like, and then at this part of the song, I wanted it to be like the compressor to come in, and I was like, oh well, I'm not using the compressor in this way. I'm using it like throughout the whole song to keep the song like checked and volumes don't go up and down. So I am using a compressor. And like, and you just gotta figure out what they actually mean. And in this case, they wanted the song to get more intense and
Really?
louder,
Okay, yeah.
but they used the compressor because maybe that in their mind that's what a compressor does.
Yeah.
So
Well, in general, it
right,
does,
yeah.
but not exactly.
Yeah, so I used to get a little annoyed, but I came to the conclusion that the reason that people are coming to me is because they can't do it on their own,
Yeah.
or they don't want to, or they don't have time. So it's not my job to tell them, no, you're wrong. That's this. I can school them a little bit on what the terminology is, but they're hiring me to make their product the way that they want it. So I'm not upset. I'm just trying to better understand what they actually mean, and sometimes that just takes a little bit of patience.
I found audio engineers to be a lot more calm and placid compared to video guys. They just like they are willing to listen to what, maybe it's because they're so used to hearing you have no idea what you're talking about and I have to understand what you're talking about because I actually have no idea what you are talking about. When you say EQ and you pull out your plugin set, you're like, which one? Which one do you mean?
Right. Uh, a lot of times it's as simple as just showing someone, okay, this is A, this is B.
Right.
What you're saying, I can try to understand it and uh, resolve that issue. So here's what it sounds like. Is this what you want me to do?
Hmm.
So there's a lot of times when someone says that, they want this thing, and I was like, well, let's check this out. I'll do it for them, and then they'll be like, oh, that's exactly what I was talking about. I was like, oh, no, no. What I mean is, and they might show me a reference from another song,
Right.
which is really helpful. Put something in writing rather than like a voice message.
Hmm.
A voice message is like speaking into the ether. But when you write something down, you're a little more conscious of what you want to say if you can express it that way. So yeah, it's just about trying to really understand what someone wants because they might not know the terminology in the industry. So it's just about figuring out what they want.
Why would they care? I mean, as I've sort of learned, a lot of people like, well, they don't want to know. I don't care. I just want to have it sound good.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that's it.
Yeah.
What do you get a lot of reference tracks? Like, do people bring in reference tracks that you can use? And
I like a reference track. So I use them most often when I'm starting a new composition. Someone says, "Hey, I want music for this project. Can you write a piece of music for me?" Then having a reference track is a good way to build off of what they want, and it's usually they already kind of want that track, but because copyright reasons,
yeah,
just morals. You can't just use someone else's music.
I guess not.
Right. So I try to just you when you listen to a reference track for composition, you're trying to kind of get close to that and then add things of your own or mix other things together. For post production, like mixing and mastering, the reference track is useful for getting the levels and the information similar. So if there's a track with some like really crazy drums on it and it's like really pushing and it's up in your face, and your track has the vocals like more up in your face, you can listen to the reference and say, okay, this is what the client wants. They want more of that sound, and try to make your track a little more similar to it. Not again copy it exactly because they're using different instruments, they're a different singer, but the reference track is just a good stepping point for me. And I always like, as I'm mixing or doing a master, I'll flip back to the reference and say, okay, okay, that can be tweaked here a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a style of music you prefer to work in, or you don't care? Like in terms of clients?
Though there's just like, I guess, think about your musical taste, what you like to listen to. I'm similar to that. I really like electronic music and club music. I like stuff that's more experimental. I like styles of rock music that are a little more odd, like math rock and post rock, this sort of thing. Like
you're one of those guys.
Yeah. For me, that's more interesting to work with, but not always working in the same genre is important because then I can learn different techniques and understand in case those come up. So I do very little music in like blues, but I've worked with enough people in that genre that I can send it as a reference and say, look, I can do that as well. So getting out of your comfort zone is important.
Right. What is a bad day at the office for you? Because you said, well, sitting at a desk, it makes it just like an office job. And I'm going, no, sir, I don't believe you. I mean, because actually one of the previous episodes I had, this lady, she's a camera operator. She's in Turkey right now. And so it's just like, how do you have a bad day? I mean, I imagine there are bad days, but like for you, what would a bad day at the office be?
When you're doing anything that's not music, when I'm there to do music, and when I get stuck troubleshooting something or equipment just doesn't work and I'm wasting an hour like troubleshooting a software glitch or something, or maybe the project isn't going the way that I want and there's a communication problem, or those are the bad days in the office because it was when I'm distracted from the whole reason I'm there. But that's necessary. You need to have time to deal with things and fix problems. So when I'm actually creating and I'm actually making music and editing, I'm having fun. But it's like all that other stuff in between, like dealing with troubleshooting, that's not fun for me.
Billing.
Yeah, it's different with everyone. Like
you get paid half up front, don't you?
Depends on the project.
Okay.
It really depends. And sometimes you're dealing with a client one-to-one. That's usually pretty helpful. Sometimes if it's a big project and lots on the line, you sign a contract, and sometimes that's half up front or it's paid in installments. There are certain companies that their accounting might be done once a year, so you might get paid like 6 months later for something that you did. Those kind of projects I tend not to really.
Well, no, because you can't finance your life that way, right?
So yeah.
Troubleshooting. How do you deal with it? I can't count the times that drumsticks have gone across the room, books have flown across the room. I haven't thrown a computer out the room, but certainly the temptation has been there. The only thought that keeps me humble is that I don't have enough money to burn this piece of equipment like the early 90s rockers. How do you deal with this?
There's a lot of cursing at the computer, but
in Chinese or English?
Yeah, mostly in English. Because I don't really curse in Chinese because I'm trying not to offend anyone.
Right.
But no, just I try to take little breaks every once in a while. Maybe like a stretch or go down to the shop and get a drink or something. Just get away from the issue, and then try to come back at it. But yeah, I don't really enjoy troubleshooting. I know who does, But one thing is like maybe taking a break from it for a little while and then coming back and try to resolve the issue that way.
Do you treat your clients' music the same way that you treat your own music, like in terms of like application of the programs, the methodology, time spent?
Mm, Short answer, yes. I mean, but there's also other things that they don't actually want the kind of time I might spend on my own music, or like, it really depends on what the client wants. Sometimes they just want
Well,
something
they have
very
a
simple.
deadline
They have
usually.
a deadline, or their idea is completely different. Some projects do get to a certain point where I might not be interested in it, but it's still respectful to show like the same amount of professionalism to it that I would on any other project. So there's some things that I'm more interested than others, but it doesn't mean that I'm gonna do like a crappy job on one just because I don't like it, because I might learn something from it uh, along the way, or maybe it's a good time to experiment with some new technique I haven't done yet. So I try to make it interesting, even though it might not be stimulating for me.
Well, like
Yeah.
2, 3, 10 years down the road, you're going to hear that track, whether or not it's the same client or you come across it again. You'll be like, you're going to remember, did you not give it your all, or is like
Right.
something different? Especially that thought. Well, I could do this, but I won't because fill in the blank, whatever. But something like
Right.
that, just making sure it's consistent and that you've gave your all, sort of thing.
If the client is professional, they'll credit me for it.
Right.
So my name's on it. Why do I want to associate my name with anything that's subpar? So I try to keep that in mind. I had a teacher in high school, my civics teacher. He made this point. It was like, when you take a test in class, the first thing you write on it is your name.
Yeah.
So if you're going to not study and bomb the test, your name's on it. Why would you want your name to be on something that's not good quality? And that always stuck in my head as something, if I'm going to work on a project, even though I might not be interested in the music, if I'm credited and someone goes and looks at the crediting and goes, well, this mix is awful. Who did it?
Yeah.
Oh, this guy. Or if it's awesome, someone might ask who did it, and I can get a referral from that. So it's in my best intention to do a good job.
Kind of different than a high school test. I mean, I don't know how many of your high school tests matter for your next job or whatever. Maybe for your next grade. I did fail out of comp sci, but I still tried it in university. Should have just followed the failure and go, don't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, with your music, I mean, and your work, I mean, it's sort of cumulative in terms of like one project leads to the next sort of thing. So it's a good idea to be as good as you can. So getting back to your music, yeah, cheers. We've been going for a decent time.
Okay.
22 albums.
Okay.
How?
Well, let's see. Some of them depends on what you rate an album as. How many songs? Some of
You
them
tell
are-
me, because
Yeah.
I was listening to, I think it was Perry Loon.
Uh-huh.
That was pretty trippy listening. It was good podcast setup music.
Right.
So that was I didn't want anything too crazy, but I don't think a lot of the stuff is too crazy. No, a lot of it doesn't have a steady beat like your trance tracks do. 'Cause
Right.
you kind of do. I was listening to it in both headphones because I was like, just in case, I knew you're a studio guy and like he's going to do something with the stereo mix at some point.
Okay.
But I don't think you did. It was nothing too crazy.
Right. Not too like movement. I mean, stuff is spaced, but
Yes.
I don't know moved like too crazily. Yeah.
You do a lot of what I would call build-ups, like
Uh-huh.
EDM build-ups or swells and stuff like that, but it never seemed to break out into like the EDM four on the floor sort of thing. So 22 albums, various track lengths, 12 minutes, 3 minutes seems to be pretty common as well. Yeah, some of the albums, quote unquote, 2 tracks,
Right.
3 tracks,
Yeah, an EP or something.
EP or something like that. 22 titles.
There you
How
go.
did you do this? Like, what was the process? Why have you been so prolific?
Well, it just started with that first album I put on Bandcamp. I was living in Alabama, in Mobile, and I had just started using Ableton Live. So I had all these like kind of ideas, and I had enough songs to make an album. So I just put a couple together. A friend of mine did the artwork. Another friend said, "Hey, I'm learning mastering. Can I master your stuff?"
There you go.
And I was like, "This is great. I have an album." And so I just kind of like had this Bandcamp always running. So when I got to enough tracks, or I felt like something was a completed version,
Yeah, completed idea maybe.
yeah, I'd put it up, and you know, uh,
So these are like collections from like 2006, you said,
from
or
2006 is when I started this Bandcamp,
wow.
but I had stuff from before that that's been retroactively put on.
Okay.
But coming to China, I started doing like an album or two a year, like just maybe sometimes more prolific, sometimes less. And yeah, just when I had something, there's hard drives of things that are like that's a concept that's just not finished yet. And when I get time, I'll do it.
How long does it take you to go from concept to finished product?
Sometimes it's really fast. I can do something in a few weeks, and then the last album I put out, Ghost Lineage, I was ready to put it out before the pandemic. I was like, this is done. And then when the pandemic happened, I would go home a little bit every night and like tweak stuff, and then I started getting busy with work, and that took 2 years to finish.
Jeez.
And it wasn't like I was in the studio every night being like, no, that needs. It was just I just wasn't. I wasn't dedicating the time, so work got busy, and then I would jump back in, and I'm glad I took the time because I found different people to like be featured on it. I found a mastering engineer that I liked. I found the right guy who did the artwork and the photography. So sometimes albums can take much longer than sometimes they're just super fast. And it's like that's the idea, and I don't want to change anything, and that's it. So
I've always been surprised when I hear someone says, "Oh, it took me forever to do this album, 5, 6, 10 years," or same with like a movie idea.
yeah,
And then to be fully honest, the in 2013, I went back to Canada to record a djembe, a West African inspired percussion album. It is still not done.
okay,
So, and again, it was because I recorded it in GarageBand. I want to learn how to do mixing. 9 years later, I'll get to it one day.
sure.
It'll
It's
come
always
up.
there.
But in terms of your work, what would you actually say is your best one, or one that you would say people should listen to if they've never heard you before? Because you have some Chinese characters on here, which is not like it's not off-putting, but a lot of English characters. You have some interesting artwork, some cityscapes and stuff like that. And people can take a look at it. It's thruoutin.bandcamp.com is the website. And then you have this neat one, the sound of walking with this elderly man, big beard, probably a little bit shorter than mine, playing what instrument is that?
This is a sanxian.
Okay.
It's a three-stringed instrument from typically from Western China, but you can find it all over. In even Japan has a couple versions of it. This album these are two tracks, and it's an excerpt from a larger compilation
Okay.
that I did with a friend of mine named Namu, and they went out to some minority areas in China, like Gansu province and Xinjiang and Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, and they recorded people that were at the later stages of their life. So this person on the cover, this grandfather, they recorded him on one of the trips. By the second trip, he already passed away.
Oh,
So they did a bunch of collection. I think in Chinese it's called cai feng. What basically it means is like going out and gathering sounds, and so they did a bunch of gathering of stuff. They brought it back to Beijing at their studio, and then they worked with different musicians to add stuff to these local minority voices, and made a whole compilation out of that. So I was given some stringed instrument like the sanxian, and so this man who's on the cover, this grandfather was singing. So I used some of his voices, and then added some electronic elements. And the two tracks that I made were the intro and the outro to the whole album. It's a pretty cool thing. It's using a lot of instruments from around China, but with like also electronic music. So there's I don't want to use the term world music because I don't really like this term, but it's using a lot of Chinese traditional instruments with modern instruments.
Okay.
That's how I would put it. Yeah.
well, it can't be world if it's mostly Chinese, right?
Yeah, but you have the let's say like is arguably it's not like all over the world. But
Like if you were
yeah.
mixing Chinese with Japanese, with South African, with Latin American, sort of instrumentation and notation and stuff like that, maybe we can go with world music. But
Right.
drum set, I don't know. That's pretty generic nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
completely.
so which one would you, if people were going to press on one icon, what would they go for first?
I would say go for, I mean, the one that I've released most recently is, I think, a more mature version of what I'm doing currently. It's called Ghost Lineage. It's the third one
Okay.
there. That one is one that, it was like the bigger release of mine this year, and it was actually the first vinyl that I had ever done.
Why vinyl?
I, I well, vinyl's cool, number one. You got to know that. But no, a friend of mine has a label in Chengdu called New Noise,
Okay.
and I sent him the material, and I asked if he wanted to release it, and he was interested. And it's just kind of like a benchmark, I guess. A writer might do short stories, but then they'll get a novel published, right? And that's kind of, for some writers, that's the mark of being, okay, like kind of more legit. Doesn't,
Okay.
I feel, for me, I'm not big into like what the fidelity of vinyl is, and I'm not a vinyl collector. For me, vinyl, just always thought that was like a personal benchmark of something I wanted to achieve. Anyone with enough money can make a vinyl. It doesn't matter. But
Especially nowadays.
yeah, I just felt like it was something I hadn't done, and I'd like to see my music in that format. I've done a lot with cassette in the past. It's probably my favorite format is cassette. But the music from writing it, I always had in mind that I was like, this, I want to hear this on vinyl. So that's why I think if you want to check it out, check out the digital version on Bandcamp, and if you want to hear it on vinyl, go buy it.
So how much of a difference is there between the digital and the vinyl versions?
Uh, so it's all started as a digital thing.
Yeah.
So um, the music is completely the same, but the fidelity is going to be, I would say, just looking at the waveforms, vinyl is going to be slightly quieter.
Yeah, good softer.
Yeah, but the whole album is also not like super loud the whole time. I found when I listened to it on turntables, it's just like more dynamic and a little like quieter in my opinion. Like all these terms that people throw around like warm, and it's got analog heat and all these terms, like it's hard for me to really describe it what that actually is, because it might be different for every person. But I don't know. I just like the softerness of it on the vinyl. If I could make it as simple as possible.
Now, you also released cassettes along with, I guess, Dan Gamer. He was on
Right.
the podcast a couple of years ago, right? Yeah, and he's into releasing cassettes as well. Why cassettes? Same question, I guess.
Cassettes at the time when I started making music for cassette, and there was a factory in Beijing that made it cheaper than CDs.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's always cool to have like something physical.
Yeah.
I loved buying merch as a kid. Like at shows, I would want to get like the T-shirt or the CD. So when I started playing and touring, I'll make sure to always bring merch. I might not sell it, but it was there, and if someone liked it, it was available and they could buy it.
T-shirts too?
Yeah. Well, I haven't made a shirt in a long time.
With tour dates? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the stuff I go by, and it's not like I even wear them. I just buy them. I'm like, I was there.
Right. So, yeah, just having merch is like something I'm a sucker for. And so when I started making music, I was like, why not do the same thing? In Beijing, a couple friends, we found another friend who had done a tape, and we all used the same factory. I have no idea where that factory is now, but eventually we started to figure out that we could just make these things on our own. So Dan Gamer, who you mentioned, he bought a tape duplicator, and we figured out how to run this audio through your computer then into a tape deck, and use that master tape to duplicate it.
Right.
How to do all the find the Taobao that makes the plastic for the cases.
Yeah.
A printer that makes really nice stickers for the top. And so we just started making our own tapes. And when I say we, like, I would gather all my files and like go to their place and
Right.
do it with them. But they were doing most of the the grunt work and
Right.
stuff. But yeah, tapes were just, it was just fun, and you can include a digital download with it.
Yeah.
So if you're not even into tapes, you don't have a tape player, it could be a that you can put on display or gift to a friend.
A reminder that you have to listen to the album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I bought that. I should probably listen to it now. Same with CDs. Yeah, I remember there was a big, I had a bit of a rift with my band back in the day. I was at Mother's Music and I bought a bunch of cassettes, 30-minute cassette tapes, because that was going to be the length of our EP. I bought them on sale or something, so I committed, it's like $1 or some $1.80. Right. And they were like, no, we should release it on CD. And like this, we're talking like this was at the transition point, like 99, 2000, around there, 2001. And I was like, I had this box of cassettes. I was like pissed. I was like, I bought them. And it only cost me like $40. But back then, $40 was $40. And I guess it's still $40 these days. But I still have them, those cassette tapes. So they're sitting there, either 20 years old, 25 years old, unlabeled. I mean, vintage. If you wanted vintage cassette tapes, I have some for you.
You can do your djembe album on cassette.
But it's only 30 minutes. The djembe. Well, actually, I could, because the djembe album was 43 minutes long, I think.
Yeah, you can make a special tape edit.
I could. Probably will. That's an idea. Now, will the tapes last? I mean, will they go through a tape recorder at this point? That's my big question.
Unknown, depending on how they're stored. I think
no special, nothing special.
Tapes I used to keep in my car would get warped.
Yeah, I think that's so. It'd be an ultra limited edition. One print per. I guess every edition would be a new edition, because you just don't know what it's going to be like.
Yeah,
I don't even know if this tape works. I mean,
try it out.
Have the digital download, and here's a backup copy just in case. I guess. So which do you prefer? Like, digital, MP3, wave, vinyl, cassette? What's your go-to mainly? So,
for physical formats, of course, I'm going to always prefer the digital wave. I mean, it's the highest quality, of what you can get, of how it started. That's how the artist made it. But for physical, I think CD is going to be my favorite, because that's right when I started buying music, and I was like 11, 12, like 95, 97. That's when CDs were king at that point. CD just always sounded very sharp and like the vanguard of technology. Like CD, you turn it over and there's a mirror. It's just like CDs are always like the coolest thing ever. Like they just felt so futuristic. So for me, CD is always like going to be the coolest, right? But they all have their different characteristics, and also CDs can be like the cheapest too, like the cheapest quality.
In what way?
They can just sometimes be like just like break easily and like get scratched and all that stuff. But there's no better format. It's just depending on what quality you want and what you're using it for. Vinyl's great because it's huge and the artwork's going to look amazing. Tape has its own warmth and
but you can't play it.
Yeah, well, if you have a tape player, and tape also has its little quirkiness. It gets it gets like warped and stuff like that. And vinyl has that scratchy needle sound. Yeah. And the skipping from CD is interesting. So, and there's other formats too, but those I guess from nostalgia, CD is always going to be my favorite.
Can you hear the difference between an MP3 and a wave?
Yes. When you're in a club and someone has played like a 90-something kilobyte rip from YouTube, followed by a FLAC file,
right?
There's a difference, but for the most part, I think it's like 320 is the highest quality
for MP3s. Yeah.
You'll be hard pressed to really tell the difference unless you're on a really amazing system. Maybe you trained your ears to look for it.
What about like 128?
Even that, I mean, you're unless there's some when you were downloading it, some imperfection that was added to it, you're probably not going to hear it. Just to be safe, I always, my final projects are always going to be wave, and then you can downsample, you can convert it down to MP3.
What do you spit it out at then for the wave file? Like, what's your bit rate and everything?
Bit rate, I usually go for 24 and 48 for the sample rate. But if you're going a lot of times for physical format, it's 44.1.
Really?
Yeah.
That's CD basically. Yeah.
So the general rule of thumb is you can go to all really high quality sample rates, you can sample down sample with no problem.
Yeah.
You can't just go the other way around. So if you record an MP3, something as an MP3, you can't make it a wave, but you can do it the other way around.
The programs will let you do that, but you will hear the difference. Like that's where you can tell the difference between an MP3 and a wave for sure. What's for you going forward in terms of your music? You have 22 albums. You're going to double that in the next 14 years, probably.
I would like to
Triple
continue doing it. There are, there's a lot of like unfinished birdhouses in in my head of albums that I want to release. So I'm going to consistently be doing that. But another thing that I'm focusing a lot on is my knowledge of the studio work that I do.
Okay.
So getting better at recording and getting better at post production. Just it's only going to benefit myself, my own music, but it's something that is transferable. Where if I want to use it for other skills, work with other artists, that's the trajectory I'm going in with the music right now is those two parts. So I'm going to be continuing on kind of basically what I'm doing now, but just going forward with it.
Is your music going to change very much? Do you think? Like, is there anything that you want to try differently or?
Um, I think with each album, I'm doing certain things they're not the same. I try to just listen to lots of music, and by doing that, I'm constantly being influenced by different rhythms and different sampling techniques and different sounds and timbres and all that stuff. I'm always kind of changing what I'm doing. I'm not trying to be one specific genre. So I think it's only natural that in a few years I am maybe making a completely different style of music. Maybe it's still electronic and experimental, but with different nods to different types of music.
Hmm. What are some names that you're listening to these days?
So let's see. When I get put on the spot, I automatically forget. Um, some artists that I'm listening to. Just recently, I found some. I think it's a producer from Brussels named Le Motel.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of like he's doing some Spanish vocal sampling, but with more like club oriented stuff, kind of like a I don't know how to explain it, bassier vibe. Uh, that's like one of the more recent things I was listening to. Also on like the rock end of things, like just going through. There's a Singaporean band called Forests.
Hmm.
They do like Midwest emo, like their music. So I try to just switch it up, and of course the Beijing. We're in Beijing, so I'm seeing lots of local artists here in the
Any
experimental
names?
scene. Yeah, there's a noise artist named Sun Yizhou, Sunyizhou. And last time I saw him, he did stuff with like homemade like motors inside plastic bottles, like just that sort of thing. And then he like wrote poetry as he was doing that, and then he sent the recording of him reading back the poetry through a speaker
Right.
and cut it so it was just the bass frequencies, and then he put the bottles on top of the speaker and it rumbled, and that was the piece. So
How long was his set?
there were three 30-minute parts of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so an hour and 30 minutes. But
Wow.
yeah, not trying to again just listen to one certain thing, but kind of just see what washes over me,
Where do you find your music? Like, how did you find this motor bottle guy?
So Sun Ijo was on a bill with me about 2 years ago at a venue in Beijing called UFO,
Hmm.
and he opened up and he did like some like very delicate kind of like noise, like kind of like if your TV is like on static, or like you hear like a ringing noise like tinnitus or something. It was that kind of small noise.
I don't. Do a lot of
Yeah.
people have the tinnitus? That
Probably,
feeling?
yeah, if you listen to stuff too loud. So yeah, he was doing like the more like that noise music. That's how I found out about him. But I usually find out about new music by word of mouth. I'll go through like places like Twitter and see bills of different shows going on, like a lot of stuff in North America and Europe. I'll go to the name I don't know on the bill, and then I'll search and listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if it's an artist I already like and they're playing a show with that artist, I'll, be more interested to like see, okay, I don't know who this person is, so I like go and check it out.
Mm.
That's how I like to do it that way rather than listening to Spotify lists.
Yeah.
Which is great. And I know a lot of people when they're working, they're cleaning the house or something, they might just put on a list and let it go, and then they might hear something. And that's actually how most people are consuming and finding new music. But I kind of just like the oddness of like stumbling upon something, and then
Well, your approach is much more needle in the haystack. Yeah, it's not like the needle of the haystack, the MP3 files. Where do I put my music file again? What was that track name again?
Yeah.
Do you I don't know if is it support, or do you just buy merch as you go, like whenever you see someone, cassettes, CDs, t-shirts?
If I like the band, and I'm feeling like it's something that might be good for my collection, I'll get it. Um, and on Bandcamp as well, if I'm preparing for a DJ set and there's an album or a track that I want to get, I'll give like what €6 or something for it, like the album, whatever. But I don't always buy everything. So that like sometimes it's a trade. Like if I like an artist that I know personally and I have a CD and tape or whatever, I'll ask, you want to trade,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I get music as well.
So how big is your collection now?
And
where do you store it?
I have some shelves, kind of like your bookshelves here, but like horizontal, and I have most of my cassettes there.
Okay.
Right now, I'm kind of not buying as many cassettes and CDs, but focusing on like my collection. So maybe some themes in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
So the last year or so, I've been trying to do more China ambient, which is there's not a lot being made. So yeah, that's one thing. Like if I see or come across something that's domestic and ambient, I'm probably gonna be more interested to buy that than maybe a punk band I see.
Where would you find Chinese ambient music?
There's a couple labels in China that specialize in that, and then there's some artists that might do a self-release of that.
Any names in particular?
The label that I like is out of Guangzhou, and they're called Jungyam, Jyugam, and it's Cantonese for I forget what it is, like being present, maybe.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but anyway, they're more focused on ambient music. So if you follow their label, then you can start to know like who else is doing it around China.
Right.
There's a handful of other ones, but for me, that was just kind of like, well, I kind of have enough cassettes, and I might not be in China forever, so why not like make a theme out of my collection?
Yeah.
Kind of have focused on one thing.
You've done touring as well, China touring and worldwide touring as well. So, what was that like? I mean, before the pandemic, of course.
Well, I guess it goes back to when I was in university. Back in the MySpace days, I would contact venues and get in my car and just drive. So I did some stuff in like the southeast of the U.S., the eastern seaboard. I went up to your neck of the woods in Canada at least twice. And
whereabouts? Toronto.
Played in Toronto didn't happen, even though I went all the way there.
Yeah.
So in the middle, went to London.
Okay.
And played at a house show, and then in Montreal.
Yeah.
I've been to a couple other places, but didn't play music there. So that was like my background of touring before I came to China, and just it's just the idea of waking up and your whole reason that day is to go to the next place and play felt like amazing to me, and I always loved touring because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I came to China, I would do like little one-off shows in different cities. Like Shanghai was my first proper show.
I would say it's easier in China than like the States or Canada for sure.
Yeah. Especially because you don't have to have a car here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just used that kind of mentality, and then when I had enough contacts, I just did like a couple China tours. And then I branched out, like I did South Korea one time, Taiwan another time, Hong Kong. And then I did like the Southeast Asian leg of it, which would be like start in Malaysia and Singapore and Indonesia. That was really cool. And each time just meeting people along the way. And
How did you set these up? Like, how were you able to get these international tours going?
just you'd meet someone that had gone there already, and I would say, okay, so I saw that you guys did a South Korea tour like last spring. How was it? And would you mind if I got some contacts? And then you get the venue or the promoter or this person in another band, and you that I was just setting it up all on my own and uh, making enough probably for the train.
Hmm.
Depends sometimes the venue would even like put you up at the promoter's house, or give you a hotel, and sometimes they wouldn't do anything. It
Right.
just depends. So yeah, I started doing that as like DIY, and then slowly, recently, the bigger tours I've done have been with like bigger projects. So there's like right before the pandemic, I went to Croatia and Bulgaria and Georgia with a Chinese contemporary dance project called Wushu. It's like martial arts and contemporary dance,
Okay.
and I think that had some funding from like a bigger, like some maybe like government kind of funding.
Possibly.
So we
Probably.
were able to go to these like all these ex Soviet and they have a really good relationship with like the Iron Curtain countries
Yeah.
because they're so I was able to go to tour in those countries and like would be completely different than a DIY tour, and places that if I was going to go to Europe, I'd go to like the big countries like
Wouldn't go to Georgia.
Germany, France, England, where everyone goes, but I wouldn't be my first thing to go to Bulgaria, right? So it
No.
was like that was a really nice way to tour. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm sure there's you could probably DIY it, but it'd be tough.
right.
Like even Southeast Asia, I imagine that would be difficult because language barrier, especially not just speaking, but in terms of searching.
Yeah.
Like, how do you find the places? How do you find the contact? It's very difficult. And then even trying to land in the city and just look around. I mean, what are you looking for, right?
It's just it's kind of this even though I wasn't playing punk music, it's that punk community ethos of like really people helping you out so much. Like I had incredible tours because I wasn't making big bucks. I was just with amazing people. Like, and it's like when someone goes to that country and they ask you, you do the same. You're like, here's this person. Just this is what you should do in this city, and that person might not even be doing it anymore. But when it references back to you, they're like, I don't really do shows here anymore, but this person does, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's just about if you're trying to be very comfortable and make a bunch of money, and DIY touring is obviously not for you, but if you want to make great contacts and play music that you want to play in interesting places, then it's a great way to travel.
Hmm. Is there more touring in the future for you?
I want to. One thing I'd like to do is with the growth of all the clubs in China. Now there's a big club of like dance clubs in pretty much all the big cities. So one thing I would like to do, and I haven't done yet, is purely like DJ and tour that way.
Hmm.
Obviously, not having to bring a bunch of equipment, but still play at some really nice clubs that I like. So that's one thing. I don't have anything booked at the moment, but definitely within like the next year or so, I'd like to do
I'd imagine
a
now
China tour.
because you've been working, which is nice, nice change from the pandemic. I'm not sure about your studio work, but like our work was sort of trashed for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
We had nothing going on, but going forward, recently been busy. Going forward, is it a time thing or is it like setting it up? I mean, you can fly to these places,
Right.
take the evening flight, then you can take the morning flight back.
Hmm.
Technically,
Yeah.
it's that easy to do in China. I mean, it's rough,
Hmm.
but you could do it if you
It's
want.
definitely doable, and the fast train
Yeah,
is another option. Some of these places, it's even quicker to take the train than the plane
right.
because of cancellations and stuff.
Yeah.
But no, it's just a matter of setting it up and making it work with the actual work schedule
Yeah.
and all that.
What about outside of China?
There's some places I'd really like to do a European tour, and before the pandemic, I really wanted to go to South Africa
Hmm.
because I'm influenced by a lot of stuff from South Africa, but I have friends there, but I've never actually gone there. And one of the thing is like I feel like you can do a lot from afar through like a looking glass, but Um, I just kind of I feel like it'd be another notch of things I want to do is like actually go there and learn a little bit more about like their scene,
Hmm.
because I'm from afar like interested in that. That's cool. This artist is cool, but like there's a lack of connection of actually having actually been there.
Right. But
Um,
you are in China. I mean,
yeah,
there's some credibility of being in China. You survived the pandemic in China.
right. Yeah, and that's another thing. If I was trying to do what I've done here from America, I'd have missed a lot of points that I found out. There's a lot of people I've met here and a lot of experiences that I've had that I only could have done if I was here.
Yeah.
So I think that makes it a little more authentic.
Could you ever
Yeah.
go back to the States and do this?
Oh, I mean, there's the skills that I have um, could be done anywhere. It's just having that client base and
Mm.
that scene. So, in my opinion, if I was to move anywhere else, it would be somewhere that has a vibrant music scene and has people that I can bounce off ideas and work with. So,
Have you
um,
looked?
yeah, I mean, I've considered places. Vancouver is a place that I've thought about. I know it's not America, but North America.
Yeah.
Um, I'm from New Orleans, which is a music city,
Yeah, huge.
but what I found about New Orleans is that it's still a really small city, and it's still a city that's kind of set in its legacy of being the birthplace of jazz and having a lot of that style of music. But as far as like new and modern things, of course there are people doing it. But when I was living there in 2008, I just felt like I didn't maybe know the right people, and I didn't feel like it was what I had expected it to be. Whereas places, of course, like Brooklyn and Austin and Portland and Los Angeles, these are going to be much more vibrant as far as American music cities.
Mm.
And I feel like New Orleans, sadly, is my hometown, but sadly, it's just a little behind in some ways. And of course, I haven't been there in 15 years. I haven't lived there.
Really?
Well, I haven't lived there in 15 years. But it's so it'd be poor of me to talk about the scene. But just in general, I mean, like anywhere that has something going on, I feel like I could drop in, make new contacts, and do what I'm doing here in Beijing. Pretty much anywhere that has music.
I have two questions about the music creation process that I don't know how well you can answer these, but kind of silly, kind of not. One of them is actually very pertinent, but one of them, I don't know, given the current sort of hubbub regarding ChatGPT, there's nothing like that for music, is there? I don't think. You can't punch in notes and be like, give me a new like direct like auto drummer basically for piano or for guitar. Easy bass, would that be an easy guitar? Maybe.
I think there's already generative AI that can make music, and there
Really?
has been for a little while. It's not as
User
widely
friendly.
used,
Right.
but this is yeah. I mean, I see stuff every once in a while popping up on this. Uh, for me, AI is a tool to help you, and there's a lot of times when I'm in the studio, especially doing creative compositions, where you're wasting a lot of time thinking about what you want to do, and maybe that the position that AI is going to have in the future with electronic music, it's I don't think that it's going to completely like erase like the producer or the artist, but it's going to make their job easier. Um, I
Yeah.
feel like we're already using quite a lot of AI in certain aspects of music.
Like
In
what?
music research, and the platforms are using quite a lot of AI to create algorithms.
Right.
In the software you mentioned earlier, the
Isotope. Yeah.
Isotope,
Yeah.
they have adaptative AI in there to like give you a base setup of what your settings can be. When you start a file, it might listen to a reference track and like calculate what your settings should be. That's a form of AI in a way. It's how the software's working. But when you compare it to what a lot of people know about like Midjourney or Chat GPT, where you give them prompts and then they produce something,
Hmm.
I think this is something that it exists in audio, and it's going to make things a lot easier um, for people, especially people that are doing composition. You get stuff from clients that might be very vague. It might be referencing other things. You might spend a lot of time trying to grasp on what that client wants. Whereas, like, if you know the right prompts, you might be able to get a good starting point,
Mhm.
and then add your emotion and your creative part in there.
Yeah.
So,
Do you use a lot of AI stuff
um,
in some way?
I don't personally use so much. I do use a lot of the like starting point stuff, like in isotope software. You can use some adaptive
Right.
stuff to give you, like, a starting point where maybe problems are, like how to go. So I might use that as, the first thing, and then tweak it from there. But
Hmm.
I don't particularly use anything where I'm prompting a software to create something for me. But I can definitely see how it's a time saver and would,
I
yeah, be
love
used as a
it.
tool.
There's in terms of creating soundtracks, my big go-to now has actually been GarageBand on my iPhone,
Okay.
where I put in a drum track and then either strings or like a keyboard, and then I use the FX thing, that little like the two boxes of it. It says FX in the corner. You
Hmm.
press that, and you have these little faders and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Because I'm just creating 12 to 15-second clips
Right.
for some videos. I love it. It's fantastic. I mean, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
Not AI, but the fact that you can get the drummer to play on time
Right.
and change it on demand, and then have the piano or the strings played as well on demand. Wonderful. I mean,
Yeah.
so, and I can only imagine that there's other musicians out there who are like, finally, the technology has caught up to the way that I think and the speed that I need to work at. Because
Hmm.
there's a lot of people who have hard drives full of stuff going, just need the time, I just got to
Right.
do this. But now, like, AI makes it a lot easier. It's like, well, the only thing this track needs is this. And you can create some, even just a rough track to
Hmm.
get going a little bit faster on your finalized product, I guess. So,
Right.
but AI, so you don't think AI is going to replace us anytime soon in terms of our creativity?
I think it's going to do some things that we're doing already and make it better. And I think certain jobs are going to go away.
Hmm.
That's just natural. But it's not going anywhere. It's not like we're going to just stop using AI because we have this technology. We're naturally curious primates, and we're going to keep making things. So AI is, here. Might as well embrace it.
But do the primates create electronic pipa music?
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
Well, I guess if we were all considered lumped in together, yes,
Yeah.
possibly. 70, 20, 10. So this is, I don't know if you've heard of that. Another American came up with this idea of a January challenge, a song a day challenge. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Oh, okay.
And given that you've produced and released so many albums over the years, and we mentioned about what makes an album. Um, every January for the last 2-3 years, I've been doing this where I create a song a day. And
Okay.
the philosophy being that 70% of the stuff that you do is going to be complete garbage, 20% is going to be okay, 10% is going to be good.
Okay.
In your own work, do those numbers make sense? Where would they change? And does that at all sort of apply to what you do in terms of your own EPs and your music?
So, I think that these these are pretty good percentages to start with. Um, but I don't know if I can go that, like, to the decimal on them. What I think is important is that the more you do something, the more that you're going to find what is good and bad. A lot of times with writer's block, or just not knowing what to do, it's hard to just say, okay, sit down and do it. And I think, like, this kind of attitude is useful, because usually when you show up and you actually do it, you start rolling. Even sometimes I'm just not feeling it at all, but I just make myself do something, some basic beat. I might just trigger wanting to 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 open up another file, and start creative
Mm-hmm.
start the creative process. So, I like these little challenges. Like, they make people, do something rather than just sitting on something. So yeah, I think the percentages, they make sense.
When do you think an idea is done, or when for you is an idea done? Like one of these hard drives of partial tracks. When are they done?
People say it's never over, but I think it's over when you hate it.
I agree with the
Right.
podcasting. I just go fuck it. I can't do this anymore.
And I'm joking. Obviously, it's not that I hate the stuff I'm doing. It's just you reach a point where um,
There's only
uh,
so much you can do. I think.
you could go on forever, especially with the the state we live in with digital, computers and everything, where just it's infinite. So when something's done, is just there's a point where it's just like, okay, this is good enough, and it's hard to describe what that is, but you just sometimes you just gotta call it. Just say this is where it is. I mean,
When do you normally call it? When have you found that you've called it? You're like, that's it. That's done. Tap out.
hmm. When I can listen to something and kind of get distracted, and then it doesn't my attention doesn't get jolted back to the music.
Right.
So if I've listened to it enough times, I'm listening for any imperfections, any unsmooth transitions, any parts that just don't gel with the idea that I have. And when it starts to feel like a song or a piece of music, that's when it's finished for me. So I might have a rough sketch of an album, and then I'll like do some laundry, and as I'm doing it, I'm separated from the music, and then like something will be like, well, that wasn't right.
That doesn't sound
Yeah.
good.
So that's kind of like towards the final stages of the piece being finished. If I'm not being distracted
Hmm.
by the music, and it's just like kind of feels like I'm putting on music, then that's kind of where I can be like, okay, it's where it should be.
Which I guess makes sense because if you're listening to music that isn't distracting, then that's decent, right? Like
Right.
then you're not obsessing over like what this track is terrible,
Mhm.
whether
Yeah.
it's Spotify or your own or whatever. Yeah, I guess so. It's the sickening factor. I think is when it's like fuck it, I can't do it anymore. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to think of this anymore.
Right.
Press publish. Just press play. I just get it done because I don't want to think of it anymore.
Hmm.
Which is typically how I publish a lot of my podcasts and
Sure.
videos. But in terms of like this January challenge, that one again, learning Logic Pro and music production and movie production, I love that challenge. It actually starts at the beginning of December where I start making a drum track per day,
Hmm.
and then January is a song a day. So there's a different focus, but yeah, it's been good in terms of making 2-3 minutes. It's gonna be 15 minutes, but you have to do something
Hmm.
each and every day. Have you ever done anything like that before, or?
So I haven't joined any of like the like official challenges where or like collab things with other people where you're like doing a competition or something like that. But I have given myself uh some like guidelines.
Mhm.
There was a month where I went to the studio a little bit earlier every day, and instead of doing my work immediately, I had like a concept of what I was going to like do as far as an album, and I just spent 30 minutes on that before I started any work.
Mhm.
And by the end of it, I had like 8 things that I thought were kind of cool, and I sent them to another friend of mine, and we actually made an album based on it.
Wow.
So, not having that and just like maybe saying, "Hey, let's collab on something," that can fall apart really easy. But giving myself a fixed time and say I'm only going to do this, and it's not going to be an open-ended book. It's like 30 minutes, and then you're done. It doesn't matter where you are on it. Just something might be good. Like
Yeah.
you were saying, the 20% might be good, and then 10% might be really good. So it's just about, yeah, that sort of thing. And sometimes that's helpful in finishing something, giving yourself a deadline or giving yourself a constraint, limiting yourself. This, yeah, can be useful.
Now to the meat of the podcast.
All right.
China and Chinese. You've been here since 2008, right?
2009 is
2009.
when I came to China.
And you are street taught Chinese language, or at least those are my words. But you're fluent,
Right.
I guess mostly.
Sure. And I mean, yeah, yeah.
I guess in terms of fluency, you work in the Chinese language sometimes.
Yeah, I've a lot of my clients, it's Chinese. I mean,
Phone call comes in, English or Chinese, no, doesn't matter. You can take the call.
yeah, it depends on what their level is and which language they want to communicate in.
Chinese.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with most of my foreign contacts, it's English.
Yeah.
It's going to be weird to speak in Chinese if there's no reason for us not to. But not all of my Chinese clients want to speak Chinese. They want to also their English might just be as good enough, and why not use that? It's just a tool to communicate. I didn't always used to be as comfortable doing this in Chinese, but it took being involved in the music scene and playing in bands with Chinese members, and it was like, oh, this is a whole new set of vocabulary I have to learn. It's just simple equipment terms and verbs for music and like all this stuff. Like,
What's some terminology, music terminology that you've picked up?
well, early on, it's just how we in English use the verb play for instruments.
War.
Yeah, yeah.
But
In
how does it change?
in Chinese, they for a wind instrument they use the blow, chui, and for drums they use hit, da,
Okay.
and for strings it's tan, which is like a strum. We have them in English, but it's just like you slowly learn like little things like that, and then uh, there's a lot of just vocabulary that I picked up by playing in bands, and then so when I wanted to go on to record with clients or work with directors that didn't speak English, I had some basis of Chinese music vocabulary that helped out, and a lot of times they might feel a little more comfortable that they don't have to like go in a translator and talk to me. I can just use the experience language I know.
Yeah.
Now, just because I know a lot of like music terminology, if you want me to talk about other subjects in Chinese, I might not. I might fumble around and sound like I'm just arrived, just a new arrival to China. Uh, so I don't know. I live in China, so I think I should speak Chinese, and so that's why I have made it a point to learn it.
But there's been a lot of successful expats, maybe not successful in relative terms, that have not learned the language to your ability wouldn't be able to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
It's usually like, girlfriend, can you help me dealing with the delivery boy?
Oh, totally. And I think that's just it has to do a lot with the industry that you're in. I have friends in the music industry that have have like passable Chinese.
Hmm.
They rely on English still, and it just depends on how far you want to do it. I think language always opens the door. It makes things a little bit easier if you can speak the language. But if you're relying just on English, it doesn't mean you can't be successful. It just means that you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff
Hmm.
and a lot of understanding and rely on other people. I don't always want to have to rely on someone to translate for me.
Or a cell phone that would break the momentum as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. How did you learn Chinese? Did you study it before you came here?
So I was my major in university was foreign languages and literature,
Oh.
but my concentration was in Spanish. Part of the department's credit system was that you had to take a few other languages as well.
A few.
Yeah, so I took like two credits of French. If I was Spanish, French, pretty interchangeable in some things because they're Romance languages. And then I saw Chinese, and I was like, that'll be cool. That'll be cool to learn. And I started taking it, and it was a self-taught class, and you could go to the classes or you couldn't. And so I went.
Okay.
I would try to go to as many as I could, but I was taking so many other Spanish classes at the time. It was quite difficult. So I didn't really give the right amount of respect and attention to Mandarin, but I passed the class with like I don't know, maybe like a C or something. Like
61%.
yeah, and it was a final verbal exam, and I remember saying I knew the word like 1 to 3. I knew how to say little sister and like thank you, goodbye, and I don't know. Those are like the words I knew, and I passed the class. So I never thought I would come to China, and I said, well, Mandarin, whatever. Yeah, I know it's a growing language and it's gonna be important in the future, but I just was really focused on going to Spain and doing more with Spanish. So
You went to Spain though, right?
I did a short study abroad in Mexico,
Oh, okay.
but I've never been to any other Spanish speaking countries. So when it came time to start looking for jobs, I was sending all these resumes to places in Mexico and Argentina and Chile, and then a friend of mine was like, "Have you thought about maybe just applying to China? Because there's a lot of jobs there." And
When was this?
this was in 2008,
Okay.
and I found an English teaching job.
Surprise, surprise.
Right, and I mean, also I didn't really understand that there was such a big education sector in China,
Mm-hmm.
but it made one of the guy here. It made total sense. So I was like, well, that might be a nice little thing I can do for a year, and then I'll go somewhere else. And it was just really a nice transition, like flights and accommodation and healthcare and all that stuff was like taken care of by the company, and I didn't have that in America.
Yeah.
So I,
And if you went to South America, those contracts are very different down there
oh
as
yeah,
well.
and the pay was a lot less, and
You're not making bank down there.
no, but it's a nice experience, and so that's basically so when to answer your question about how I learned Chinese, this long backstory. When I got here, I was in the city of Ningbo, and not a lot of people that I knew spoke English. And I was very curious, and I wanted to go out and see as much. And I just put myself every day in a situation where nobody spoke English. I had a notebook. There was no smartphone. And
Were
I
you
just
writing pinyin or
I was
Chinese
well
characters?
pinyin at first,
Yeah.
and then first just like English,
Yeah.
like what I thought it sounded like, and then learned pinyin and the tones. I still don't really know my tones, but you know,
Right. But
um,
like, so you're on the street talking to some lady and a situation that you don't know their language.
right.
What are you writing down? Like,
Well,
because at what point do you know what they're actually talking about?
well,
And she's not just agreeing with you to be nice to a foreigner.
I was actually, in Ningbo, I didn't know what was Mandarin and what was Ningbonese. That was another thing, because
Okay.
they speak another language down there that's more similar to not Japanese, but Shanghainese, and
Hmm.
that it's a different language. It's not dialect; it's a different language. So I was hearing all kinds of different words that were some were Ningbonese, some were Mandarin, and I also had a book, and I started talking to my Chinese colleagues, and I put stuff together, and I would practice writing like my Chinese characters. I would sit down and try to write them so I could at least recognize them. I'm still not great at writing, but I can recognize okay.
Yeah. Writing
Um,
the characters helps a lot in character recognition and radicals, pronunciation as well. I found just overall, you need to write it as well.
yeah. So that was it. It was just like I would go to a restaurant, and I'd go make sure I would go to one restaurant at least once a week and talk to the same person and soak up what I could. And it was around the 2 month mark. I was with my roommate, and we were drinking beer in a restaurant, and the guy knew us, and he came over and was like, "So what are you guys doing this weekend?" And we're like, "Oh, we're going to Nanjing. We're gonna," and then like I remember leaving the restaurant and being like, "We just had a conversation with the guy, all in Chinese," and I was like, I'm learning Mandarin now, like, and I just used that mentality to always put myself in a situation that might be a little uncomfortable. I might not be super understanding of what everything was going on, but I would learn stuff, and that's how I learned Chinese. Not really through a classroom. I did, take some classes to like help boost myself a little bit for like the HSK and stuff like
Mhm.
that.
Did you
Later,
ever do the HSK?
so later on, I did the HSK, but it was about 2012.
And what you did 3, 4?
I
Which one
did
did?
I did HSK. But the numbering system's different now, but it would
But
be
at that time,
HSK
what?
4 about
Okay,
that.
right.
Because my plan was to go to a university here, and you need HSK 6, or you did at the time. I'm not sure. So I was doing a little bit of that. That helped me a lot with reading,
Mm,
just studying for the HSK, and I continued to study for HSK 5 and 6 after that, but I never went and took the
right.
exams.
I hear this a lot. A lot of people get to HSK 5 and they always want to,
Hmm.
but then it's like your language is decent enough at that point.
Right.
You're communicating unless you absolutely have to learn HSK 6 level,
Hmm.
you're not going to ever do it. Well, it's difficult to make yourself do it.
Yeah. But I mean, where I kind of like feel a bit conflicted with Chinese and Mandarin right now, because um, I'm at that point where I can communicate on a basic level. I use it as a communication tool, but it's pretty much lost all of like the luster of like um, I'm not super. interested in like the language outside of it being a communication tool.
Okay.
So when I was studying Spanish, I was like, man, I just love the way it sounds and the culture around it and the you know, like stuff like that. I was super interested in it linguistically. That's really important. And uh, now after 15 years of studying Chinese, well, it's not studying, but being around it,
Hmm.
I associate it with a necessity of life here. And for me, it's like I don't feel too compelled to like open up a book of idioms and learn them. You know, maybe you have one here, which is a shame because it's like it means that my Chinese will kind of stay where it is right now, and I'll learn
Yeah.
things along the way. But I don't feel that push as I used to like continue linguistically to like make my Chinese better.
If
Yeah.
you learn the idioms, like how would then you'd sound like them.
I
Because
don't.
you'd make generalizing, sweeping, generic statements, and you're going, yes, that's right, but can we deal with the situation as it specifically is right now, not a grand 5,000 years of history sort of bird's eye view of it?
Yeah.
That's what my takeaway from learning idioms is that they're very life teaching
Hmm.
sort of, yes, you're right, but it doesn't really solve the problem that we have here. I mean, are there any idioms that you like actually? Have you've learned at least a few, I would say.
So I guess my favorite Chinese idiom is "gong bao ji ding."
Okay. The food.
No, but it's it's just you have to have four,
Yes.
usually four ones. No, I mean I don't know super like a lot of them, but like the last really I guess interesting one is I don't know if it's an idiom or not, but it's "churnar bunar." Some might argue it's
Eat where,
yeah,
not be.
bu as in to grow that thing,
Grow
like
there. So you eat there, you grow there.
yeah. So what it means is like if you eat you're eating a fish, right? And you go to the eyes. If you eat the eyes, it's good for your eyes.
Oh yes, which gets into the whole like animal medicine sort
Hmm.
of ideology.
Yeah. So I think that's just a ridiculous one. And then there's like the ones you learn when you first get here that are always fun, like people mountain, people sea,
Oh
like
yeah.
Ren Shan, Ren Hai, just stuff like this. But um, I feel like I haven't really done a lot with Chinese idioms. Like I still probably a lot of it goes over my head, and it would be helpful to understand what actually people mean when they say something instead of making my own assumption.
Well, I guess it'd be good for job openings and job closings. Like sort of like when you first meet someone, I guess that's when you'd use your idioms,
Hmm.
your Chengyu and stuff like that. HSK5, you don't do so many of them. That HSK6, I looked at the textbooks and yeah, it's like there's a lot of four character
Yeah.
words and setups and sentences. Formulaic language. We
Hmm.
have it in English. We
Oh
drop
yeah.
them all the time, and
Sure.
it's funny because as an ESL instructor, people are talking about like kids want to learn about the like student learners want to learn about the idiomatic language. How does natives say it? And when you hear natives speak, you hear chunks. We're so used to it,
Hmm.
and I guess Chinese people are used to the Chengyu the same way. But the way that we collocate certain words, the one that stood out was a month full of Sundays. I was like, okay, that's a very specific idiom, but I've never heard it before. I'm
Right.
like, I don't even know how you would drop that into a conversation.
Right.
That's a specific example, but there are formulaic chunks that we use all the time in English
Hmm.
that to a language learner, they're going, how do you, what's the rule behind using that
Right. What do you
sentence
mean?
as
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
in that way? And you're going, I have no idea. We just say it that way.
Hmm.
So, like the whole formulaic chunk, I have no idea. Wouldn't that be an idiomatic language of some sort, some formulaic language?
Hmm.
I don't know. So,
Yeah, it's got to be. Luckily, you and I come from English-speaking countries, so we just get it natively. I can imagine what it's like to study other languages because I have, but to study English as a non-native speaker is super. I think I don't know.
complex.
It's
It's a
yeah.
dumb language. I mean, it's thrown together.
I mean,
It takes from everything and it conjugates verbs weird and everything. And people ask for rules, and I go, I don't know.
they change all the
They
time. Yeah.
do.
And even I don't think Americans really speak it as it is intended to be, but
Well, there's a whole other nation that would say, "You're right.
Right.
You've bastardized that language pretty badly." What brought you to China in the first place? Was it just work, or was it anything else?
Work made it easier. It made the transition easier.
What were
But
you getting paid back then?
oh wow, I was on probation because I just started.
Okay,
So it was 5,000 a month.
renminbi.
Yeah, which I thought was good. And then I got after the third month, I got 6,000.
Okay,
I just thought it was weird that I was on probation, but I didn't do anything bad. I was just new, and I got
yeah,
paid less. But yeah, it was that was it. And you were like kind of urged not to do any other work. So
like tutoring and stuff like
tutoring.
that.
So I
Yeah.
did some tutoring, and at that time, I was really happy to get.
So I did it
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, I mean, it's just like you had 2 extra days. Like I think Sunday and Mondays I was off, so I had
Yeah.
like 2 extra days, and I
And
didn't really know anyone.
all the parents and the kids are asking you anyway to tutor them. It's like, but your boss just told me don't.
Yeah, right.
Although his kids are right here asking me asking to tutor them as well.
Yeah. So I mean, the hourly rate, I think it was like someone. I remember asking for 120 and thinking and like feeling bad because it was too much, and now it's like private tutoring is ridiculously way more expensive than that. But everything was a lot cheaper too. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like an old man being like, in my day,
Well, Ningbo
yeah.
especially. I mean, not Beijing. Beijing, the prices have gone up quite a bit.
No, I mean, like it was pretty cheap. It was taxis started at like 9 kwai at that
Right.
time, and I remember my cell phone, and I hardly ever topped it up. It's just like I put 100 on, and then like a few months later, I was like, oh, I need to put money on again.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was cheaper, so that money getting paid that much was fine, and I wasn't sending money back home to pay for like student debt or anything, or like
Lucky you.
yeah. I mean, it was it was enough money at the time, and now like there's a lot more that you're more like future focused and like you're thinking about things. So like even though the pay has gone up and that sort of thing, like this it's still a more expensive China than it used to be.
Hmm. What's been the biggest change that you've seen in your time here? 15 years. That's Olympics, Beijing Olympics.
Right after I came right after, so
Okay.
everyone was like, "Oh, it was so different before the Olympics," but I had no basis for it. The big thing when I came was the Shanghai exhibition. That was the
Okay.
big one.
When was that?
It was 2000, like it was 2009, 2010, I think,
Okay.
somewhere around there. The biggest one is the switch to everything being digital, like digital payment and stuff.
WeChat, Alipay.
I've seen a change in the like the education industry for sure. Like all that private teaching that was really stressed. There was a lot of opportunities in
Mhm.
that private schools. I feel like maybe that's gone away a little bit.
That has gone away.
Yeah. I've also felt that one big thing is like when I first got here, it was a lot of if people were, I think people have mm, maybe become less internationally focused, if I could say that. Like not that they're don't see the value of the international community in many industries. It's that there's more of a pride in like the domestic market as being good enough.
Hmm.
I've seen. So I guess I should say that I've seen China building itself more in these last couple of years, rather than it kind of looking to other countries as a benchmark. It's kind of like focusing more
Hmm.
on itself as already being good enough.
Has that been a good thing for the country? Like
I
in
think
what you've seen for the people, their development, their opportunities?
I feel like there needs to be some sort of blend.
Hmm.
There definitely needs to be a uh, an outward thinking, and like you need to be aware of what's going on, and you can't always be just about one thing. So I think a blend of things is good. Um, so in a lot of ways, okay, in music, let's talk about that. People will complain, well, this band is just copying this foreign band, right? So they're just trying to look at the foreign bands and copy it. And why can't more bands be like themselves here? But then when more bands are themselves, it's like, well, they're just focusing on China. They're not thinking about the world. And I think that there's merit to both of it. So uh,
I guess like in this regard, like could China ever have a Taylor Swift or an
I think
Iron
China
Man?
has like 6 Taylor Swifts right now, but
But outside of China, they're not
they're
known.
not known.
Right. So like, here you can hear every day. I hear Taylor Swift,
Hmm.
or Iron Man, or Tony Stark. Like those names, Hollywood, sort of his name dropping and stuff like that. But like, can China ever achieve that same sort of global cultural soft power or presence? I should say, not even soft power, just presence.
Yes, I think it can. But it's time. It takes time, and I don't think it's fair to compare like what a another country has done and say, well, why can't China do that? It's gonna do something in a different way,
Hmm.
and in a lot of ways, people from abroad, if we're thinking about like positive soft power, or yeah, just soft power, there's a lot of things that China's already known for.
Chinatown.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Right.
Gung Bao Jiding. That's pretty, pretty big export, isn't it? You can get that just
Mhm.
about in any Chinatown around the world.
Right. I mean, it's a succulent dish. It's very good.
Do you see yourself staying here for a long time?
My answer has like varied throughout the years. Obviously, I'm not going to be here forever. My family's back home, and
Yeah.
uh, I think the pandemic changed a lot of the way that I looked at it and how it was here for how China was a different case than the rest of the world and
Hmm.
how it dealt with it. I mean, that definitely influenced like how I want to spend the next part of my life. So I'm definitely going to be, I think, like here for another 2 years or so. But I've said that
For
many
the last
times.
15 years, last 13 years, I guess. Yeah.
Right. And I think one thing that's stopping me is that I don't really own any property here.
Right.
Uh,
Other than your studio equipment and everything.
yeah, that kind of stuff. But that my plan is to like ship all that when I leave, sell things. But that's something like if you want to build a base and have things, property is important. But uh,
Storage locker.
yeah,
A house is a glorified storage locker.
right.
Yeah.
And then like relationship wise, I'm not with someone that's from China. So
She's from Singapore. I've heard
Singapore,
good things about
right?
Singapore, though. Would you ever consider that? I'm putting you on the
I
spot here. She's
no
going
no
to
like
listen to this.
uh not to get into too much of my personal life, but I've always liked Singapore a lot. It's one of the countries when you asked me earlier if I thought about other places to live, that's one place I think it's got a lot going for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, that's one thing. So will I be in China for the rest of my life? The answer is no. But I definitely want to have a good time and make the best of it while I'm here.
What would it take to get you out of here? Like what would make you leave? I mean, you survived the
Yeah.
pandemic. That was a big one. You have a business.
Mm.
I mean, global travel's going again.
Yeah. It's a family. There's going to be a time where I'm going to take care of my parents.
Right.
That's a big one. And I'm not also like stuck to China. It's just where the opportunity is.
Yeah.
If I could be doing the same thing in another country, I would definitely do it. And maybe it's getting closer to that time.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I know some older guys who they have the green card. Do you have a green card, or are
No, I
you?
don't. I have
Okay.
a
Right.
Z visa.
Right. So, like, some of them have green cards, and I'm not sure what happens that if they're over 60 or 65 and it expires if they can renew it.
Hmm.
But I know that some of them are like, it would take old age and near death to basically remove them from
Hmm.
China. They just won't go. So, I I don't know. Is China a good place? Like, would you recommend someone to come to China? I've asked this to other people who've been here for a long time. What do you think?
Without sounding like an old head, because it's always going to be better when you got there. It's
Hmm.
all relative. So it's not the China that I came to now. That China is no longer here. It's a different China. So would I recommend you to come here based on what I thought of it in the past? No, but everyone makes their own experience, and there's no reason why coming here now you can't have a good time and a memorable experience. I mean, I think that if you want to come here, I recommend it, but come with the idea that it might not be easy mode all the time, and there might be stuff that's amazing and great, and you might get some awesome opportunities, but there's going to be a lot of days that are going to be difficult. It's a country, especially for people who don't speak the language and from a different culture, where it can be a difficult place to live. But it's just about how much you want to put into it.
Do you think someone could replicate what you did, moving to Ningbo, small town, a couple million, smaller, and make a go of it, or would they have to learn Chinese before?
Uh, I'm not special in any way. I just put in the grunt work, and like I was lucky. In a lot of ways I was lucky, and I consistently did things. So, if someone comes here, I didn't know much Chinese. If they want to come here and focus on that and do it, it's definitely possible. It's just about how much you want to put into it and how lucky you are.
But someone couldn't survive in China without learning Chinese outside of the big cities. It'd be very difficult.
It would be, yeah, it would be hard.
You'd be at the sort of the mercy of your girlfriend or whoever you sort of start dating.
Yeah, and think about that girlfriend or that partner. They're not going to want to be your translator all the time.
Yeah.
And they're not going to want to do everything for you. So you could be here, but you're going to have a hard time. It's not going to be easy.
What's been the greatest thing you've experienced, and what's been the worst thing you've experienced?
Um, Greatest things. I mean, it's just the ability to travel and see things. And I had, during the pandemic, I had a great opportunity to work on a documentary with National Geographic
Oh, neat.
as a host. And I got to go to Mogao Caves in Dunhuang.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And I think that was something I might not have been able to do anywhere else. It was a special situation. It was the middle of the pandemic, so no foreign crews could come, no hosts could come. I was just here and recommended by someone.
Hmm.
That was one of one of the best like projects I've worked on, like as far as like the experience I got from it. Um, and not to be super negative. I mean, there's been lots of things that have happened, but like the thing that gets to me, it's more of a consistent thing. It's just like the kind of xenophobia.
Yeah. It's
Um,
still there, isn't it?
yeah, it's something that is going to happen when you're an outsider anywhere.
Hmm.
I obviously didn't experience being the way that I look and the way that I am from America. Never experienced this sort of thing. And then, it's not that bad here, but when it's like, over 15 years, the culmination of many instances, that's my least
Mm.
favorite thing about living here is that the small number of individuals who are extremely xenophobic that don't represent the general population, but those people um, have made some uncomfortable and less favorable experiences in China.
Hmm. Do you think that will change going forward? Will more or less people be xenophobic, and more people be a little bit more, although they might not know English, they'll be like, okay, yeah, foreigners, great, whatever.
I don't think it's connected to class or education. I think that people have a certain way that they react to people that are not like them, just inherently, uh, as what they're kind of taught and told to be. So I think the more that, okay, so without a doubt, China's developing and it's becoming a prosperous nation, and it's improving in a lot of ways. Uh, that doesn't exclude it from still having bigotry, and I mean it's an individual thing as well. So I'm not saying it's the entire population, but there's definitely certain people who just they don't like things for a certain reason, and I think you're going to experience that anywhere you go.
Final question. You're a street learned Chinese learner,
Yeah.
speaker, language aficionado,
Uh-huh.
expert. What's your favorite character?
My favorite character,
Do you have one?
yes, it's a character is Byung. I think
Wow.
is my
Is that the one
favorite.
with 37 different components to it?
It's like, yeah, it's one that's really hard. There's a whole story behind it from Byung Byung Mian. Is it my favorite character just because it's complicated?
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe a more serious answer. Like, what's my favorite character? Um, I don't know. I don't think I have a particularly favorite one.
Do any
Yeah.
characters stand out, like sort of a most memorable character that you met?
Mm, there are certain ones that I think are visually pleasing, but I don't know. I like the character for for peace. An Ping An, the
Mm-hmm.
An and Ping An is quite nice. And then just like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really think about them too much. Is because they're the simplified characters. I think are great for reading and learning Chinese, but not as interesting as the the, the traditional characters.
Have
As
you
for
tried the traditional characters to make a go of that?
uh, I mean, I did a little bit of study of Japanese, so you got to learn them
Oh yeah,
there
yeah.
for that. And then traveling through places like Hong Kong and Taiwan, you're going to see them, so you recognize some, but they're just like way, I think, visually more pleasing. It's like,
There's a lot more to them.
hmm like I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, the character for love in simplified and traditional, there might be Sheen, the character for
For
heart,
heart,
is inside
the traditional
traditional,
one,
but
but
not
not in
in.
the simplified. They took
Yeah,
the heart out.
someone might want to check me on that, but
Yeah, we'll have to
it's
verify
stuff
that.
stuff like that where I think to make it, there's a reason they made them simplified. It's easier to teach a bunch of people how to use it, communicate better. I get it, but as far as like how it looks visually, the traditional is always going to be nicer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Where can people find you to troll you, to download your music, and to seek your services?
Well, the place I recommend everyone to check out is Bandcamp, but I'm on Apple Music and Spotify. For Chinese platforms, if you're in China and listening to this, NetEase and QQ are where I mostly put up my stuff.
Wow,
QQ Music.
QQ.
Hmm.
Wow, that dates you.
Yeah, well, it's actually, I mean, still a player that some people use, but yeah, NetEase or Wang Yi Yue Yun is the Chinese for it. And I'm on your usual social media ones. You just type in throughout and you'll find me.
Right on.
Mhm.
Throughout in THRU.
Uh-huh.
Right through and
Through.
then out OUTIN.
I
Right
am
on.
all in one word. Yeah.
Appreciate it, dude. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for taking the time.
It's been great.
And that's episode number 42 of the Steven Sersky Podcast. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. All the show notes and the tracks are available up on my website, stevensersky.com, under the podcast section. And of course, this episode is available to stream on all the major podcast outlets. Thanks again for taking the time. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll do this again. Have a good one. Bye-bye.